What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the upcoming release of World of Warcraft Classic. Now, I apologize for the slight delay in getting this episode out, everyone, but I've been away from home for work this week, but I promise it will be worth the wait, as today we talk to special guest Luke Lafreniere from the hugely successful YouTube channel Linus Tech Tips about his love of vanilla WoW, rigs, and Nostalrius in our featured call. Then Kevin Jordan is back to talk hunters. Some of the listeners call in about the huge PvP schedule news that we got the other day. And finally, we get back to the hunters as I chat again with former Death and Taxes member 1927, who gives us a rousing guide to hunter PvP tips against every class in the game. You all know the drill by now. This is a community-based podcast, so if you like what you're hearing, join the Discord now and keep the conversations going with us all over there. Follow me on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2, or email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. If you'd like to call into the show, make a suggestion, or just say hi. Everything you'll need is in the show notes for each episode, along with the show's Patreon link if you'd really like to help keep the show going. Or if subscriptions aren't your thing, then you can help keep the lights on at Countdown by checking out the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi. There's also the show's merch store with some great designs over there for t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, etc. So please be sure to check that link too. And finally, just a reminder, the Countdown to Classic Guild is recruiting. No matter what region you're playing, head on over to the Countdown to Classic Discord to get more information about our plans for Classic. We'll be forming a serious, but not hardcore, fun, but not necessarily casual number of guilds who will tackle all content with a fun, mature perspective, and we're looking for members and potential officers. But with that said, let's start the show with Calling Countdown. All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and we've got a very special guest today. I'm so pleased to welcome Luke Lafreniere of Linus Tech Tips. How are you, mate? How's things?
Good, great. I'm amazed you said my name properly. That's really, really uncommon.
Well, I would hope so after about 10 years of French lessons. So I think
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's so, I say to people, like, I've learnt a lot of languages. I've studied Japanese, I've studied Cantonese, I've studied French. Can't speak any of them, but, you know, at least I can get some of the pronunciations right. But, mate, thanks so much for agreeing to do this. I really, really do appreciate it. Obviously, I'll give you a chance to let people know a bit more about you who might not be too sure, but I'll cue you in a little bit in terms of the fact that, you know, obviously you are a large part of one of the bigger YouTube channels going around, Linus Tech Tips. For anyone who's interested in tech, that is the place to be. Now, I was telling you just off stream before we started that I'm not a massive tech guy myself, but my girlfriend, the lovely Patricia, is, you know, obviously she works in the industry. She's well into all of that. We watch LTT every now and again when we come home from work at night. And she just randomly blurted out about 2 weeks ago, hey, you know that, like, Luke is a really big WoW guy. And I was like, we've been dating for a year and this show's been running for a year and you didn't tell me this, but I'll let you plug yourself a little bit, mate. Just, for the listeners of Countdown who might not know about LTT, what are you guys all about?
Yeah, so Linus Tech Tips or the Linus Media Group network in general, is mostly focused around computers, computer hardware, computer education, that kind of stuff. So we've got Linus Tech Tips, which is a little bit more on the entertainment side or infotainment side, where it's supposed to be funny, but usually you're supposed to learn something or experience something in some way. And I was with Linus when we founded Linus Media Group in 2013, and with him before then working on the channel since it had around 70 something thousand subscribers. Then we've got Tech Wiki, which is much more educational, usually about very specific topics, and has been used in classrooms to teach different subjects. Then we've got, can't pull a blank now. Tech Linked, which is like a more news-based show, which is really great and has been exploding because it's our newest channel, which is cool. And the now somewhat defunct channel Super Fun, which is completely unrelated in every way to all of our other channels.
Well, I guess it's a good thing, and business must be booming if you're doing so much that some of them are slipping your mind.
Yeah, it's doing pretty well to the point where I've actually broken off at this point. I still obviously do stuff with Linus Media Group from time to time, like I'm on the WAN show every week, and I do some other things spattered throughout the year. But my main role now is running a new platform called Floatplane. And the idea behind that is, it's sort of like Patreon in the way that it is a way for community members to directly fund creators, but it's not like Patreon in the way that we have our own content delivery network behind it. And we have, methods for delivering rich content to users natively through the website, like video streaming, etc.
Okay. Excellent. Well, obviously amongst all of that, busy work you're doing with Linus Tech Tips, and outside of that, as you've explained, there's obviously a number of hobbies that come up. And as I mentioned, you're a big WoW guy, and I just found out about this, but I haven't heard it from you yet. We talked for a little bit before I started up this call, but I'm dying to sort of get into that as well. Obviously that's why you're here, but tell me a bit about how you started up with WoW and how you fell in love with it back in the day.
Yeah, well, I've always been really into computer games. That's actually why I got into doing stuff with computers, was because my computer broke, so I couldn't play Diablo 1 anymore. And I was like, that's unacceptable. Gonna solve this problem. But yeah, I got into WoW because I used to play EverQuest way back. And that eventually kind of faded for me. Then I played Aeon for a while, and there was this looming WoW thing coming on the horizon. I remember a very embarrassing thought where I was like, that sounds stupid. A bunch of like thralls and chromashes running around. That's ridiculous. And then the game started and I was like, right. No. Okay. That makes sense. But yeah, I played in the beta, and I played roughly, all the rest of Classic and Burning Crusade and Wrath, and then kind of faltered off after that.
Wow. Now, excuse me for trying to sort of dive into this, but doing the math now, I know you're roughly in your mid-20s, is that right?
Yeah, I'm 28.
Okay, 28. So
a little bit later.
You mentioned that you played EverQuest before WoW. Like, I figured that you might have been, relatively young when you were playing WoW, but now to hear that you played EverQuest as well, like you must have been a tot almost, like a toddler playing EverQuest.
I was an early bloomer. Family friends of ours, the youngest brother was my best friend, and the oldest brother was my older brother's best friend. They were very into computers and computer games as well. And I was over at their house one time, and their older brother was playing EverQuest, and he let me make a character on his account. And there's some stupid story where like I was so bad at the game that I was playing a ranger, and this guy offered to make me a bow, but I had to follow him around the city for a second because he was like gathering some materials. And it was a city up in the trees, and there's these rope bridges connecting the different platforms in, I don't remember the name of the zone, but it's the elf starting zone. And I couldn't run in a straight line because I was that bad at the game. And I ran off one of the rope bridges, hit the ground, and died, and couldn't figure out how to send the guy a direct message. So I never got my bow. But yeah, so I was pretty young when I played EverQuest, but I think that was like grade 6 or something.
Okay. So, I mean, it's also interesting to hear that you were on WoW straight away. Like, I love when I actually bump into people that also got involved in the beta. And when I've asked people this question who happen to have played in the beta, it was so long ago, they go, oh, mate, God, you're stretching the memory here when you ask questions about the beta. Do you happen to remember much, or does anything stand out to the forefront of your mind about those beta days?
There was the weird stuff like plane striding and some other things like that, where like Torrens didn't have a mount. They just had plane striding, where they would essentially just run really fast. And there was some other like weird quirks like that, but outside of the fairly major changes that happened over time, like the fact that there was no battlegrounds that early on, and different stuff like that, I think I think the game was fairly true to what it was, if that makes sense. Like the beta, I don't believe was that far off. There was some very clear and obvious changes, like plane striding, like battlegrounds coming into the games, which I know didn't happen from the beta to release patch. It happened much later on, but still, a lot of people don't seem to remember that certain things weren't in the game. But I think like from beta to alpha, it wasn't a massive change, especially back then. Betas were real betas, unlike they are today.
Yeah.
So I think if you remember that, the changes that happened from that beta into release was not that crazy.
Well, I'm sure what everyone's asking in their heads next is, what did you roll? Did you start a character and stick with that one from day one when obviously we got the official release, or did you play around with a few?
I flopped around for sure. My first character, I think my first character was a gnome. Like a gnome mage or something, but I didn't run with it for very long at all. Like I don't even think I hit level 10. And then I re-rolled a night elf hunter, got that to like.
It's very standard. Everyone's had their night elf hunter.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a requirement of being a WoW player. And then I felt like that wasn't for me, rolled another night elf and it was a rogue. And at that point I was like, we should maybe try something different. I got that rogue up to 30 or something as well. And then my whole family rolled, my dad and my brother played as well. And my whole family rolled over to Horde, and I fell in love with Horde, and I made a Tauren warrior, and I still have that same Tauren warrior today. And he's definitely my main.
Very nice. So you kept up with the game by the sounds of it. Have you still played over the years?
Yeah, usually I'll jump in for a little bit each expansion. I ran a raiding community in Battle for Azeroth, but I killed it off after we cleared the first raid on the heroic, just because like I didn't think that crew was capable of doing mythic, and I tried to come back for the next raid, but it wasn't that interesting to me, so I kind of fell off again. But yeah, I've kind of tried each expansion, and then it's been like, yeah, it's not really there for me. Classic, Burning Crusade, and Wrath I went fairly hardcore in each one of those. Right.
Now, just jumping back to something that you mentioned, you said that your dad and your brother played as well.
Yeah.
And we actually, for those obviously who might not know, we were hoping to do this, last weekend, but you said you were busy because you were curling with the family. And so it sounds like you do a fair bit with the family. So I always jump on people who bring this up if it's available, but what was it like playing WoW with the family?
It was really cool. My family's very, very competitive and very, very, like sports oriented, I would say. And video games actually play fairly well into that, because you have especially when you have a multiplayer game, because you have the team aspect. So we're all able to team up and go beat something or accomplish something. And that's very sports-like if you think about the mentality. So getting my brother and my dad together, like it always kind of made sense. My dad was usually some type of damage dealer. I was a prot warrior and my brother was a healer. So we were kind of rounded out, and we could do pretty much anything we wanted to do as a group, as long as we just filled in the remaining spots. And yeah, it worked pretty well. My dad actually shined quite brightly in Wrath of the Lich King. I got him to roll a warlock because he's very numbers oriented, and he's very good at maintaining things. So I got him to roll a warlock, and he went from like not being that great on the damage meters to beating everybody. And it was great.
Now appreciate
another fun little quip, for my 16th birthday. Instead of buying me a car, my dad paid for my epic flying mount training. And that was like one of the best gifts I've ever gotten.
That's fantastic. I love it. And I mean, it sounds like by your reaction, which would you have preferred? It sounds like you would have preferred the mount.
Oh yeah. Like 100%. There was no way I was in a extremely competitive raiding guild at that point in time. So there's no way I was going to be able to save up the money, because I was spending it all on consumables and whatever else.
Yeah.
And it sucked because being a prot warrior at that time, at that part of Burning Crusade, your repair bills were obscene. And all the consumables and stuff that you needed were obscene. So there was other people in the guild. We'd be going to a raid and they'd be notably further ahead of me because they have their own epic flying. I'm like, no, I'm so slow.
I mean, usually when I hear people saying that they played with their brother, they usually also mention that they had a few, like, fun or tongue-in-cheek fights along the way. I've had a set of brothers who come on the show regularly who actually said that they love each other, obviously, but they said they got in fist fights and stuff over WoW. Ooh. Did you got any, not to that extent, but any smack talk around the house between you guys about who's the better player or anything?
No, I don't think so. My brother's great. We've always gotten along really well. Like I said, we're very competitive, but we're usually very competitive in like a team aspect. So we're usually on the same side. And we played such different characters. He played an undead priest and I played a Tauren warrior. So we were always like in support of each other instead of against each other in most ways. And we also were quite often not in the same guild because, different time zone issues. At one point in time, my brother we're Canadians, but my brother went down to play football for North Dakota. And so he's in a drastically different time zone and has drastically different availability because of that. So we're in different guilds and whatever else. But I think the only animosity between us would have been when we shared an account really early on and we were on a half-hour rotating schedule where you could only play for half an hour.
Yeah.
And it's just like the amount of stuff you can do in half an hour in WoW is not.
It's limited. Yeah.
Especially in Classic. And we're like, man, like I want to run WC and I can't do this in half an hour. Come on, give me more time.
Now, obviously we've gotten to eventually a moment in time in late 2017 when Blizzard's come out and announced, hey, guess what? You asked for it. We're giving it to you. World of Warcraft Classic. People collectively lost their minds. What was the reaction in the Lafreniere household when you heard that news?
It was pretty major. Like, we may or may not have partaken in a number of private servers, including Nostalrius. I have a Nostalrius shirt, but I couldn't find it. Yeah. And I even I printed what was it? It was like the player list that they published. I printed that and I have it all printed out.
Oh, great.
I was pretty into Nostalrius. And I talked about Nostalrius all the time on the WAN show. So when it got announced, I think, it just a lot of excitement. Messages were flying pretty fast, but I think we all also knew that it was going to be pretty far out. So we held back a little bit, but we've like from literally the day it was announced, we already have a LAN party planned for the day of release. So
that's fantastic.
Give some context.
That's fantastic. Just out of interest, just to go down that tangent, it's really interesting to hear that you were so big into Nostalrius, and obviously people generally point to that private server as, mostly the progenitor of where we are now in terms of getting World of Warcraft Classic. What kind of character did you play on Nostalrius? Did you mix it up or did you again go Tauren warrior?
Tauren warrior. And I designed him the exact same way. He has the exact same horns. He has the exact same everything. That character has become a bit of my identity. I have I think it's, my girlfriend's away right now. It's like almost 600 days / played on him. And I basically only played him in 3 expansions, just to be clear about that. And I had other characters as well that I mained at different periods of time, like mostly a shaman, but a few other characters. Like I had a number of max level characters and just that guy was 600 days. 600 days at the end of Wrath. So yeah, it was make the warrior, especially when it takes so much time to level up a character. Cause it's classic. I ran with the warrior and I tanked for a pretty decent guild. Actually, were we clearing? Yeah, we cleared BWL before Nost got taken down.
Okay. I'm sure I've spoken to plenty of Nostalrius players in the past on the show, but we've never really kind of focused on it and had a sort of such a love for it come up like it has organically in this chat. But if I were to ask you, there's that famous video that goes around on YouTube of the shutdown of Nostalrius and everyone gathering together and, doing slash yells like, I love you all. This was amazing. And come on, Blizzard, give us official WoW Classic. Yeah. How did you feel when you found out that Nostalrius was closing down?
Pretty bad. I should have gotten it. It's on a server that I have here at home, but I recently moved, so it's not online, so I can't bring it up right now. But I have a video recording of my brother and I in voice chat, walking around outside of Orgrimmar before the servers shut down. And it's like half an hour long, and it's just pretty depressing. I watched part of it like a few months later and was just like, wow, yeah, that's not great. It sucked because, my brother and I still play games in general every now and then, but like, to pull our dad into a game, it's a little bit harder unless it's early versions of WoW.
Yeah.
That can get him out of the woodwork. So with Nostalrius, we had like gotten the family back together, and it was a really cool thing on a much deeper level than I think some suit at Blizzard could understand.
Yeah.
Like our family was literally closer together because WoW Classic was back. And like everything kind of fell back in line. My brother was an undead priest. I was a Tauren warrior. My dad was going around making obscene amounts of gold and doing a whole bunch of damage, which is just his thing. It just, I don't know. It was a very cool feeling. And to have that taken away was like literally a diminishment of our family unit. So that it hit pretty deep.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm presuming, I guess I shouldn't presume, is the family ready to do it all over again? Is dad coming back for WoW Classic? Your brother's coming back?
Yep. Yeah. After Nostalrius, we tried a couple other servers, but, none of them were really as good. One of them we hit max level on, and then the like Zerg rush of people that seemed to go from server to server abandoned it. And there was just no one online ever. So we leveled up again on another server, and then the same thing happened to that one, and we were just like, okay, let's just stop. And then I think it was a couple months after that, the announcement happened. Okay, sweet. There we go.
All right. Well, it might be a little bit of a fruitless endeavor to guess what you're going to roll for WoW Classic, because it sounds like this Tauren warrior is coming back in full effect. Is that right?
100%. Yeah, no question. The second I launch the game, I will remake him exactly how he's looked since whatever freaking year, the first year it was out. I think it was 2004, but yeah, whatever. Yeah, that's 100% what will happen. I will probably also make a mage now, knowing that the servers will be safe, and it'll be worth investing my time into stuff. I will probably make a mage as well. Just because my warrior will inevitably be protection. Even though I played mostly Fury in Classic, and Fury in Classic is extremely good, but, I will probably end up playing protection because that's just, I think it works well for me naturally. And that's expensive, and mages are crazy good at making money in Classic because of DM, Dire Maul. So yeah.
Well, are you planning on mixing things up at all? I mean, obviously knowing that you're doing the same character in class, I can tell you that personally, one of my goals for WoW Classic is, I've said on the show repeatedly, it's like that opportunity to do it all over again. You know, if you were to say to someone, you know, if you had another shot, you know, in late 2004, let's say you joined WoW and you played through it. If you had a shot to do it all over again, would you do it the same or would you do it different? And some people are obviously saying, well, you know, I want to mix it up this time. I either want to be a healer or I want to be more of a PvP player when I was a raider before and, you know, stuff like that. I know that I'm trying to do stuff that I didn't do before, but you're the same class and character. Are you going to sort of work different professions this time? Are you going to work not everything the same? I can see you shaking your head and now nodding, going, "Yep, everything the same."
Yeah, it's especially for Classic. Like, so to be clear, my favorite, and this might be a little controversial, my favorite expansion was Burning Crusade. I really liked Classic. I really liked Wrath, but Burning Crusade was number one for me. And if they did Burning Crusade again, I would probably be more willing to mix things up a little bit. For Classic, yeah, like whether I'm Fury or Prot is a little bit up in the air, but I'll almost certainly be Prot. One thing that I would like to do is try to main tank for a guild. In Burning Crusade, I did a fair amount of main tanking with my hyper competitive guild. And it was really fun. And one of my like terrible stories from Classic was, I did a lot of unconventional things at that time, which have become not unconventional at all anymore. But like the way I built my Fury Warrior pissed off a lot of people in the guild that I was in. And a lot of people in that guild, that were DPS warriors were arms warriors. and they all thought I was an idiot because I went Fury, and they all thought I was an idiot because I wanted the Warblades of Hakar, and they all thought I was an idiot because I was wearing a bunch of male gear that had plus hit on it or plus sword skill and whatever else. And I did all this weird stuff because I just like internally didn't like missing.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that's like the way to go.
Yeah.
So it worked. And even when I was topping like number one in the whole guild for DPS charts, there were arms warriors talking to me being like, if you're apparently just good. If you just ran arms, you'd do better. And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. You don't get it.
You're a pioneer.
In ways, but not because I was smart, literally just because I didn't like seeing the miss thing.
Yeah.
I can't claim that I like did any of the math or anything. It was just, I liked having lots of rage because I didn't like waiting for abilities.
Yep.
And I didn't like missing because missing seemed stupid. So I just like solved those problems and everything else just kind of fell in line. But I've always felt most natural tanking, being in the front of things, having some amount of leadership that comes with that, et cetera, has all kind of made sense for me over time. And there's the terrible story of in that same guild, eventually I needed to roll prot because we ran out of tanks, and I had pretty good protection gear. And I also did a few weird things at that time, which ended up being fairly normal. Again, I didn't like not having rage. So I would often run, a little bit faster weapons that did things that didn't seem very tanky. Turns in today's meta, there's like, I need to take less damage weapons, and there's TPS or threat per second weapons. So I was also on the forefront of that, but again, not because I was smart, literally just because I didn't like an empty bar. But I really wanted Thunder Fury, and I was mostly an off tank. I would try to run Fury whenever I could, and I would respec prop when we needed it, or I would tank as Fury when we needed it. And because of my running Fury being number one DPS and then also being able to prot, that guild wasn't super good, to be clear. It was in Burning Crusade that I played in really competitive guilds. This guild was pretty chill. But I had the most DKP. I showed up to every single freaking raid. I told my girlfriend I couldn't hang out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. My parents, grounded me on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which was a flat out lie, but whatever. And I saved up DKP forever. The left side of Thunder Fury drops. I'm supposed to get it. The guild master loots it to himself because he was, and he knew that I would have won it.
Yeah.
He master loots it to himself, thinking at that point in time that if you had one side in your inventory and the other side hasn't dropped in a raid that you were in, you got it guaranteed on your next raid, which is not how that works, but that's how he thought it worked. So he mass loots it to himself and then server transfers himself. And that's how the whole guild thought it worked. And that broke that whole guild. That whole guild completely fell to the ground after that. Because we lost our guildmaster and everyone was pissed at each other, and there was like my side of things, and there was like everyone who didn't give a shit, which was the majority of people, and then there was the guildmaster side of things, which was quite small. After that, I ended up server transferring and going a lot more hardcore because I was like, I don't want to raid with douchebags anymore. So I found a really competitive guild that was actually very awesome. I used to run with Dominus, Sardaukar, and I had a very short bout with the Flying Hellfish on Kil'jaeden.
Yeah, that was sorry, I've spoken to Chris Cluey, who also ran with the Flying Hellfish.
That's cool. My run with them was extremely short,
right.
So he probably doesn't remember me, but I was mostly Dominus and Sardaukar, but they were all on the same server. I remember at one, for a fairly short period of time while I was in Dominus, sorry about the noise in the background.
No, that's all right.
For a very short period of time when I was in Dominus, I was more geared than the main tank in Flying Hellfish, and I was like, look at me. I got better random chances.
It never ceases to amaze me, sort of hearing the same guilds get dropped sort of passingly in chat, because as I said, like, we had former NFL player Chris Cluey on the show who told a bunch of stories about the Flying Hellfish, because he was there for quite some time.
Do you know what his player name was?
Oh, I'd have to go back and listen to the episode. If anyone in chat remembers Chris's character name, please yell it out. I'll send you the link after this, mate, and we'll figure it out.
Cool. I'm certain he doesn't remember me, but I might remember him.
I should know it, but I'll get back to you on that one. But you said an interesting thing, obviously, about the Burning Crusade, and I don't think it's an overly controversial opinion to say, well, look, Classic's amazing and everything, but I'm kind of more of a Burning Crusade kind of player. And that is something that, you know, I'm not sure if you ever sort of wander your eyes over to forums or subreddits or anything like that. That's something that pops its head up a lot. And there's kind of this thing of people saying, look, yeah, we wanted Classic, but it's secretly the gateway drug to Burning Crusade that we really want. And, I'll give you a crazy theory of mine. Now, you tell me if there's any truth. Sorry, Tsunami saying it was, I think that is it. It was LOATE, Loate.
Yeah, I followed their guild really closely from the outside. They were further along than we are, but we were fairly competitive with them when we could be. So I followed a lot of their characters and I recognize that name. That's cool. That's actually really cool.
Yeah. So with the Burning Crusade, do you find at all that you liked it a bit more because, okay, now I know it was people say it was an improved version of the game. Classes became more balanced, you know, things opened up a little bit more. A lot of people enjoyed the extra professions. A small part of me likes to think an added factor that we don't talk about with why people liked the Burning Crusade more is a lot of people who seem to be saying this are, again, people around your age. Do you think that you got, you know, just that little bit older and basically your command of the game got that little bit better that you started to appreciate more, or was more just, no, the game was just flat out better?
I think, because Classic ran for a really long time. I don't know how many people remember that, but Classic was the longest era of World of Warcraft, if you want to call it that. So by the end of Classic, I had a pretty solid command of the game. Beginning of Classic, no, I was a bad player. And that's one of the reasons why I was in not that great of a guild, because I joined that guild pretty early on when I was probably around the level of most of those players. But near the end, I think I was beyond, not because I'm like amazing or anything, but because I think I just put a lot more playtime in than most of them did. And I got more used to the game. I got a lot more used to MMOs. You got to think back then people were playing like almost exclusively Counter-Strike and RTSs. So it was a bit of a different deal, but I think there's a lot to it. It kept a lot of the charm of Classic. Like I think it was, I'm trying to remember the abbreviation for it, but ZG in Classic, there was, or ZG or whatever. There was a very similar raid to that. I don't remember what the acronym was for it, but there's a smaller raid on the side that you could probably pug while your guild is doing other things, or your guild would do that sometimes. The progression of the raids are really good. Stuff like Karazhan was an amazing raid. And it was the first raid that you progressed through. Oh yeah. In not AQ20. No, I'm talking about a raid that was in, Burning Crusade. AQ20 is from Classic. But yeah, it mirrored a lot of stuff in terms of what you had, like Cataclysm onward. They just like took an axe to everything. I feel like Burning Crusade was like a spiritual, like an actual proper spiritual successor to Classic, where like they took a lot of the stuff that was really good and carried it forward. And then they took a bunch of stuff like Arena and introduced it in a way that it didn't screw up Zolaman. Perfect. It didn't screw up the game in any way. It just added this really cool side thing. And honestly, if you mentioned earlier about how like, are you going to reach out and try new things? I did a little bit of PvP in Classic, not very much at all. And this time around, I'm not going to touch it whatsoever because with the knowledge that people have of Classic is a very abusable game system. There's a lot of things that were really weird. There's a lot of gear in the game that's like rare and hard to get. That's complete garbage. And there's a bunch of blues that are like best in slot until AQ40. Like the balance of things is super out of whack. The balance of the classes is super out of whack. The different item combinations that you can put together are super out of whack. And PvP is just going to be, mind my language, a complete shit fest. And I just don't even want to touch it. If BC came out, I would touch PvP. There's also problems in BC with PvP. I think there's problems with PvP in every single WoW expansion. But I think it got a lot better. Class balance in general, raid wise, PvE wise, PvP wise, got a lot better. I think the amount of things to do in the game improved a lot. I think the quality of the writing and the design of raids improved. There's always like oh my god, MC's just like, MC is the quintessential raid, and you will never get past that. It is how people describe raids. Like it's just perfect in that way. But the writing and the design that went into something like Karazhan was just incredible. Luke, the Care Bear in Classic. Yes, I will be a Care Bear in Classic. I got glad in season 2 in Burning Crusade, and I PvP'd in actual Classic WoW, but the new Classic WoW I probably won't be PvPing very much. Operation Camp Luke and STV. I actually I'm going to derail myself and run a quick story about that.
Go for it.
My mom played WoW for a short period of time. She got to 40 something on a hunter in Burning Crusade. And, this is Burning Crusade was when I PvP'd a whole bunch, and, I got glad in season 2 and all that kind of stuff. I played a lot. I got exalted for, all the different battlegrounds in Burning Crusade and all that kind of stuff. And my mom is playing while we're raiding, and she's an STV. And some dude ganks her, and she tries to fight back, but she loses. And then a max level character comes by and ganks her, and then starts camping her body right around the time that our raid closes. And at that point in time, we had the most geared rogue on the server.
Yeah.
And we had a few other like pretty beefy dudes. So I told my raid this, and I was basically saying like, I'm going to go over there and try to hold it down as much as I can. I didn't expect the entire raid and everyone else that was online in the guild, literally everyone, to volunteer to go effectively camp the entire zone of STV and just shut it down completely.
Yeah.
And we got the most geared rogue on the server and everyone else in STV and just like formed an invulnerable bubble around my mom.
I love it. Get away from my mommy.
You can't touch mom. She just wants to go hunt things with her little pet tiger thing.
I love it.
It'll be okay. That was one of my favorite moments.
That's fantastic. Sure. Now, mates, to go off on another tangent, obviously, you know, part of your professional background is the building of rigs, right? That you know how to put a PC together. I think it's pretty fair to say. Now, you guys obviously also do a thing on LTT called Scrapyard Wars, and I think you won the latest season of that. Is that right? Last season?
Yeah.
Okay. And, I was watching a video as well the other day. As I said, the lovely Patricia was, showing me a PC that you built, the one with the liquid in it that you won an award for. Is that right?
The mineral oil computer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing work. So I feel like you're very qualified to answer this question, because a lot of people talk about the rigs that they're going to put together for Classic, and obviously a little bit tongue in cheek, but some people are trying to figure out how to recreate a potato PC from back in the day. So
don't do that.
I've got a few questions just purely out of interest about this. Like, well, first we'll start with this. So do you think that it's possible to, I mean, keeping in mind obviously that they're running WoW Classic off of a relatively recent client and all of that, do you think it's possible to recreate an old school computer, like an 04-esque rig, that would be able to somehow minimize performance for players?
If you try to truly recreate, like if you try to literally build the computer that you had piece by piece and you remember everything that you had from back then, I don't think it's going to be a good experience, which is maybe the point, but I think it'll be a little bit worse of an experience than, so I can see the pain in Luke's face. Yeah. Because there's other things going on. First of all, you're not going to want to run Windows XP, because Windows XP is an extremely insecure operating system. And you're not running like freaking, I don't know, like Winamp and an instance of MSN with Vent in the background. Like the rest of what's running on your computer is going to be heavier. The game itself is probably going to be heavier because it's running off of a version of a newer version of WoW. It's all going to be a bit harder. So if you get your like 512 megs of RAM, things are going to be a problem. please don't do that. If you want to have a bad experience, there's other ways you can do that. You can build more modern hardware. You can intentionally hamper the game down. You can do other things. I don't know why the heck you want a bad experience. But if you're that masochistic, build a worse computer and forcibly hamper down, your settings and your frame rate and stuff like that. And hate yourself. Yeah. There you go.
Well, it's something I have a laugh every time I see it. And, this will mean a lot more to you than to me because as I said, I'm far from the most qualified tech guy around, but, going through some YouTube videos of people trying to recreate this experience, rig wise, I found a comment like this from one of Super Soaker's YouTube videos, who's another WoW content creator, from a person named Beta Rage, who said, if you want to do this, you'd need an 800 megahertz CPU, 256 meg of RAM, and 32 meg of VRAM with for the graphics card, with transform and lighting as your minimums. And obviously, that, as I said, that's going to mean a bit more to you. But people who
that just won't really matter because it's running on a newer version of WoW. So it just won't. That's what I'm saying is there's kind of incompatibility issues. It's not the same game. As much as we want it to be, and as it seems to be as true to the idea of the game, it will be. It's not the same code. It's not the same base. It's coming out of a launcher. It's not an executable that you run directly on your computer. You're going to be using Battle.net to launch it. And there's other things happening on your computer. And someone in chat also mentioned, you're going to need a slow internet connection as well. Yeah, that was a really big deal. And that's going to be really hard to do now because one of the big problems wasn't just the slow internet. It was the latency. There was huge latency back in the day, on WoW servers. And that's going to be fixed on their end to a certain degree. And you would need to somehow find a way to make it worse on your end. Someone in chat, Hellgate2, brought up that actually a really good way to do this without being a complete idiot and spending a whole bunch of money on stupid hardware, would be to just run a VM, run a virtual machine, install it in there and manually hamper down your what allocation you're giving to the virtual machine and try to hurt it as much as possible. And I think that would be a much better idea. First of all, you're not buying a whole bunch of old hardware that you're not going to want for anything else, but, and is sometimes actually sold at a very high premium in certain cases, because of people doing these sleeper rigs for other reasons, or not the opposite of sleeper rig, I guess, an actually old rig. But yeah, I would run a virtual machine, try to limit everything the virtual machine can get, but also remember that it's functionally impossible to actually perfectly recreate what you had back then because of infrastructure changes that are happening outside of your control. You can do a fair amount on your own end, doing a virtual machine and hampering down the allocation that you give the virtual machine, and get a crappy keyboard and some other stuff to try to recreate it, try to forcibly introduce some latency on your own. But yeah, it is going to be functionally impossible to one-to-one recreate WoW Classic. First of all, there's too much known about the game. So the gameplay is going to change a lot because everyone's going to know the best way to build every character, which was not a thing back in the day. Even at some of the highest rating levels, there was still a lot of, unknowns about the game. And there's changes that are happening to the client itself and to Blizzard's infrastructure side, which had to happen obviously over all these years, that will make it a little bit different.
Now, everyone who listens to the show knows that I'm allowed one stupid question per episode, so I apologize in advance for how silly this one's going to sound. And I know my girlfriend's going to hit me over the head for asking this one, but if we talk about, back in the day, people do complain about some instances that happened in terms of if you did have a pretty crappy rig back in the day or a pretty crappy internet connection, we talk about places like the suppression room in BWL just being something that would absolutely tear your computer apart or your experience apart. We talk about things like the AQ opening where you've got a huge collection of players just causing your computer to, crap itself. People, but even on another note, people would say basically if you were in Ironforge, if you were in Stormwind or whatever, and it was peak hours, even just then being in a city would make people's, experiences go to hell. So, you get, people joking, whether they're joking or not, about like, I was getting 1 frame per 5 seconds and things like that.
Yeah.
My question is, if you're able to answer or somewhat guesstimate, how much of that sort of performance problem back in the day could be put down to the rig versus the connection?
It's going to be really hard to put a number on that, but it was definitely a mix, because even if you had a very good computer, there's certain things that you couldn't overcome. But see, part of the problem back then is I had a terrible rig at that time.
Right. What were you playing with?
In terms of the exact hardware of the computer, I don't even remember because it wasn't mine. But when I was raiding in MC in Classic, I was averaging, I used to fight bosses by zooming my camera all the way in and staring at the floor.
Yeah.
So that I could move properly. And I would have to look at the mini map and communicate with other people through custom Ventrilo binds to get them to tell me where I was and stuff. Which was a nightmare because so I ended up getting a better rig near the end of Classic, and I'll go over that in a second. But near when I first started raiding, I would average, if I wasn't doing that stare at the floor mechanic, I would average 1 to 4 FPS on fights, which was kind of insane. And I could barely move around big cities. I would avoid big cities because it was a problem. You get a little bit of a mix of things. So like in something like that raid or a big city, one of the bigger problems is just the amount of things on screen and the amount of like events happening is going to be really hard for your CPU, for your graphics card, for your RAM, stuff like that. Latency stuff is a bit different, but can also be tied into that. It's hard to judge this far detached and being as ignorant as I was about those things at that time. But it was definitely a mix. There was internet problems and there was hardware problems for sure.
No, it's the worst question I've ever asked on the show, and thank you for answering it so politely when you're probably thinking,
cool.
who is this guy?
I wish I remember more, and I wish I knew enough to understand in order to remember properly, if that makes sense. But
Now, still just covering off on this topic of rigs, and then I want to move on, but you talked about, some of the rigs that you've owned, some of the rigs that you've played with, and, do you have any memories of the builds you had? You said eventually you got your own computer, but also like coming back for WoW Classic again, I'm going to cheat and ask a second stupid question. Like, these people, not that they're necessarily all coming out of the woodwork and saying it, but there's no need to have an amazing computer for World of Warcraft. Everyone knows that. So, people are getting excited and going, I'm going to build an amazing rig for WoW Classic. And it's kind of like, why?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. You probably don't need to do anything. Your fairly crappy laptop is probably fine. My rig's ridiculous because I think that's somewhat of a given. I could probably run a whole bunch of versions of it at once.
Out of interest, what's your rig at the moment?
The CPU actually got a step down from when I built it because we needed it for work. But I've got a 5960X, 128 gigs of RAM, 2 GTX 1080s, 3 10 terabyte hard drives, 3 1 terabyte SSDs, 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, and a bunch of other fun stuff.
I can hear my girlfriend audibly moaning in the background as you just rattled off that list.
It's also it's got 12 pounds of amethyst crystals in it,
right?
That have a white LED backing behind them, so they glow. I've named all of my computers after Pokemon since the first time I started building them. That mineral oil computer you heard of was Squirtle. And then I had built a water cooled computer between that and now that was called, I still called it Squirtle usually, but theoretically it was War Turtle. And this is Geodude. So the case, is in a color called anthracite gray, which is like a coal gray. And I really liked the case. So I thought like, oh, it's coal gray. I could probably get away with Geodude for that. So I filled the inside with purple crystals and it looks super cool.
Very nice.
Self promote, but you can see the build log for that on Linus Tech Tips.
Very nice. As someone in chat is saying, Tribal Bob's yelling out, but can it run Crisis?
Barely. Yeah.
Mate, we'll sort of round out the interview. We'll hit the home turn now. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the LTT team because there's, quite a few of you now. And I'm wondering do you guys talk about this around the office? Are there others on the team who are like, hey man, WoW Classic, let's all get on it?
Not a ton, to be completely honest.
Okay.
I think one of my best buddies for a really long time, Nick, might get on it with me, but he probably won't be as into it as me and my family are. A surprising amount of people in the office are like business people or camera operators and stuff like that. And most of them are not as into gaming as the rest of the guys. So actually, to be fair, the business team is pretty into gaming. But most of them are more into shooters and stuff like that. It's kind of weird because on I was very into sports back in the day. And on my football team, basically everybody played. Basically everybody I knew played Classic WoW. But now, in my current life, which is like more technical and more into computers, it seems like less people played. I'm not surprised that you had an NFLer on that played, because another weird thing that I've noticed is a lot of people that I've met that have been wildly successful were like relatively competitive and high tier at early versions of WoW, which is a weird side thing that I'm just going to shelf for now. But, it's surprising lack of interest. I know Linus would be very interested. His reason for not is that he doesn't have the time and he knows it'll suck him in. So he's trying to stay away from it as much as he can. But it's mostly me at the office. Yeah.
Well, Linus was an advocate because I saw that there was a flash in a recent YouTube video I watched recently of Linus being an advocate for, the petition that went around when Nostalrius shut down. And I didn't know that Linus was a WoW guy. So was there chat around the office with Linus about that?
That was mostly me. And I think he was being
nice.
I think he was being supportive of the idea.
Yeah.
But he didn't play Nostalrius. But for the same reasons. He had played WoW for a little bit at one point in time and it like sucked his life away.
Yeah.
So he quit and has refused to ever go back because he doesn't want that to happen again. But
fair enough.
Yeah.
So when you hear, obviously a lot of people have those concerns. You're a very, very busy man. You've become incredibly successful. Do you have any concern whatsoever about what the effect WoW will have on you at this point in your life?
I usually just aggressively sacrifice sleep. I also, I don't plan on having kids, so that frees up a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm.
It is a concern. I can't put the time into it that I did in the past, which will hurt me to a certain degree. I'm not very good at half-assing things. So half-assing playing WoW will be a bit of a problem. But like I play a lot of games right now. I have 3 accounts running on EVE Online. I play Apex like crazy. I do all this other kind of stuff. I stream 3 times a week. Playing Classic WoW on stream, I don't know how much that's going to happen. Just because my stream doesn't seem to like WoW too much, but
right.
They might be more into Classic. They might just not have liked BFA. It's fair. I didn't either. So yeah, I don't know, but I'll play. I won't be able to be as competitive as I want. Especially with the time that Classic requires to be really competitive in terms of all the consumable farming and everything. But yeah, I'll be playing regardless and I'll make it work.
Okay. I've got 2 last questions for you. And I just want to pick up on something that you sort of briefly mentioned there and that Patricia's mentioning in Twitch chat. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on, you said that not many guys at LTT play, but you're obviously a huge gamer. And she's mentioning that, she works in IT. She's saying she has the similar problems around her office where she's a gamer, but she finds that the intersection of IT and gaming isn't as huge as people seem to think. Have you found that in general? And is it something that you find odd or it makes sense?
Yeah, I have found it in general, but I don't actually, I originally found it very odd. But I don't find it that odd anymore. I think there's 2 different ways that you get into computers or IT or programming and stuff in general. I think one of them is through a love of games. Well, I think there's definitely more than 2, but I think one of the 2 main ones I would say. One of them is through a love of games. And one of them is through not a gaming direction, more of like a tinkering and intelligence side of things where like it takes to code is an extremely mental process. And it really has literally nothing to do with gaming. It is a creative and intelligence-based, hyper-intensive process of a lot of mental power going into thinking out problems and finding ways to solve those problems, and with extremely sophisticated systems. IT is a lot of management and tenacity and being able to keep things going even through the worst conditions, and being able to keep your monitoring and your attention very high even when things are boring, and etc. And it's not really, there isn't actually a huge amount of overlap necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
You could love games and hate tinkering with things, and really not like professions that make you work your brain very hard. And you could hate games but really like tinkering with things, and love professions that make you work mentally really hard. And both of them could lead you into the same spot.
Okay. Now, last question.
And there's the classic, like, I'm an electrician, so I don't want to work on my electronics when I come home. Which is like, if you're on a computer all day, maybe when you go home, you just want to do something else.
Fair enough.
Not how it is for me at all, but
fair enough. All right, mate. We'll go with the last question. You've been so good throughout this, and thanks again for taking the time for us. But I'm dying to know, you've talked about it a little bit, but even though you're doing the same thing all over again, what are you looking forward to the most with the release of World of Warcraft Classic? Is there a particular place you're dying to get to? Is there a particular item you're just absolutely chomping at the bit to get?
In terms of item, I still feel robbed because of Thunder Fury. Actually, the most watched clip on my Twitch channel is so that Thunder Fury thing bugs me a lot. That story I told you about the Guildmaster stealing that thing and running away. To the point where every time my subscription has been active since the time that I've been able to solo Molten Core, I've been farming for the bindings of Thracian, and I've still haven't gotten it. It's like the percentage chance that we're at now of me not having it at this point is kind of insane. Like it's getting beyond reasonability in a lot of different ways.
It's becoming divine intervention or something.
And I'm just trying to see here. Yeah, there's a clip with 47,000 views on Twitch of I'm just clearing through BWL, and I'm in voice chat with my dad, and he's like, I just got something in MC. It's like yellow. And I'm like, what? And it's the binding that I still need. It drives me nuts. So, I mean, I'd love to get Thunder Fury, but that's pretty, I think everybody would. So I don't know how fair that is. But I think getting my Warblades of Hakar again would be really cool. That was always a very iconic thing for me. I would really like to get that back again. In terms of items, though, I've never been super married to items. I'm not quite a loot whore, despite being like, I want Thunder Fury.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Warblades of Hakar would be cool, just because that was very iconic for me for quite a few years, actually. It was like one of my profile pictures for a while and stuff. But I would love to wall jump to Hajal again and just run around in general. I just really like the classic world. I like, one of my favorite things is just like, oh, I don't have a flight plan over there. Time to travel. I know that sounds really stupid because it's like kind of the worst part of the game, but the world's really cool to explore, and having everything be flyable or everything be like, I understand the new zones in WoW are pretty, but it's just not the same. It doesn't feel like a real world despite being designed more like a real world. If that makes sense. I'm not a designer, so I can't explain the differences, but there's something very real and very visceral about old WoW zones. And I really like the music and the atmosphere and the design of all of them, and just being able to cruise around again will be very cool.
Yeah. Luke, please believe me when I say that with the audience of this show, you are very much so preaching to the choir, so that will resonate with a lot of people listening. But look, and as I wait for a police car to go by, no, it's all good. as listener Wow Magic TV points out in Twitch chat, look, maybe the universe is waiting for you to get Thunder Fury in Classic. So I wish you nothing but good luck in that regard. Thanks. And all the best in the wars to come. But Luke, look, I'll give you a chance now. Please plug away. Tell people what's coming up over at LTT. Where can they find you? How do they get to more information from Linus Tech Tips and what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the channels are all thriving, so you can check out Linus Tech Tips. You can check out, Channel Superphone's kind of dead, but the other ones are thriving. Tech Linked, Tech Quickie, those are all doing great. There's going to be a roast of Linus Sebastian that's going to be coming out on the Linus Tech Tips YouTube channel in a little bit over a week. But if you want to check it out now, here's the more serious plug. My new company that Linus and I started up is called Floatplane. If you go to floatplane.com, you can make an account and then subscribe to Linus Tech Tips, Bitwit, or Tech Deals. It is a priced subscription. Right now it's at $3. And that gets you early access to all of the content from that creator and some extra little bits here and there. And that has the only version of the uncut roast of Linus Sebastian. The version that goes on YouTube will be a cut down version with some of the more tasty jokes taken out and some words bleeped and whatnot. So if you want to check that out, absolutely do so. That would be great. If you're more interested in me, all my handles everywhere are Luke_LAFR. I do Twitch 3 times a week. I got a Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. Hit it up.
All right, everyone, you've heard him. Please do go and support Luke by doing all of that he just said. I know Patricia and I are going to be all aboard the float plane stuff, so that's fantastic. Awesome. I can't thank you enough, mate, for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your weekend for us, and everyone who listens to the show, I'm sure, will have appreciated that. So thanks so much, mate.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for bringing me.
My pleasure. I'll have to hit you up later on for the uncut jokes from the roast.
Yeah. No worries. I got you.
Recently, on my other podcast, The Cinephiles, we covered 2017's 50 Shades Darker.
But a great way to spend time with your family when you've inserted a couple of, sex balls into your...
Well, let's say they've got the anal beads.
No, sorry, not
they're in
the front.
The balls.
Yeah.
But, wait, sorry, the anal beads.
No, because she says, you're not putting that in my butt.
They're not going in my butt.
And he goes,
right.
Oh, silly rabbit.
Yeah.
Tricks her for not your butt.
If you'd like to hear more from the Cinephiles, then please do log on to cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES. Or search for the Cinephiles on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. But now, let's get back to Countdown. Alright, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call. Kevin Jordan, back in the house, doing his thing. Kevin, it is so good to have you back for what is now, I believe, the 6th call. We're 2/3 of the way there after this one. How are you, mate?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm very well. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be excited for this one, as they are for all of them, but there's a lot of people that have played this class we're talking about today. Hunter. And I have sought out the help of a hunter to back me up as I do on all of these Ask Kevin calls. And I've got a fellow Aussie in the house. Locke, how are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. Glad to be here.
It's really good to have you. I always enjoy getting a bit more of an Australian flavour on the show outside of myself, so this should be good fun. Now, Kevin, you're a veteran now of this segment. You've been absolutely killing it. The listeners love it. Let's start out with Hunters, the class that I'm sure every person has, dabbled with at some point in their WoW career, whether they like to admit it or not. How were you feeling about Hunters? Were you happy with them in vanilla?
Yeah, very happy. Not with all the mechanics, but certainly it was one of the more important classes to put in the game in terms of appealing to different types of psychology or player psychology. It was a pet class. It was a range class, both of which are highly desired by a pretty high percentage of gamers from previous MMOs. So he was that class, and both of those things in one package. So it's funny how when people talk about the old rumors about Hunters potentially not making it in release, my answer was always no. There was no way that Hunter wasn't going to make it because of how important it was in serving up the ranged weapon thematic and the pet class thematic. So, and it worked really well.
I'm not sure if you guys heard, but some people might get a kick out of it, whether it's fitting or not, because hunters get a lot of stick, because people say that obviously, you know, they're the easiest class to play. All the kids rolled a hunter back in the day, and in the background you can hear my poor girlfriend flushing a toilet on the hunter call. So perhaps that's rather poignant and a sign for some people who might get a laugh out of that. But no, hunters are here to be taken seriously today. So you said something interesting, Kevin, and you said that you loved how they turned out, but you weren't necessarily in love with some of the mechanics. Which mechanics didn't you like?
Well, the key thing was mobility, like him having to sit in one spot in order to do his shot rotations. For me wasn't thrilling, right? So a lot of the other classes had a lot of mobility requirements, and either in positional attacks or positioning, you know, like tanks had to position the things they were tanking in certain ways, so they had to be mobile. Even like mages and warlocks had moments where they had to be mobile, or it was advantageous to be mobile in order to use some of their spells. But the hunter, for the most part, just stood still, and that was reinforced by the fact that the hunter's pet was tanking things a lot of times, especially in like, you know, solo content. And so he didn't have to move. He wasn't pressured to move very often. And we wanted to create a very mobile class, you know, because we've seen a lot of great movies where the archer, the gunfighter is really mobile as he's, you know, running around shooting things. But mechanically, it worked well that he had this weakness. You know, he had this drawback to the fact that he was pretty stationary and, you know, exploiting his dead zone, etc. So we ended up sticking with it. But I didn't particularly enjoy how little mobility he had in practice.
I have to ask, since you mentioned it, dead zone, why? I feel like if I was a hunter in real life, that someone standing between 5 and 8 feet away from me would actually be an easy.
Yeah, for sure. The dead zone was essentially a side effect of the way we had to put in ranges for things. He had melee range, and then he had ranged weapon range. We knew that we didn't want him shooting his weapons in melee because we wanted to create a dynamic where you pressured the hunter in melee range. But we also couldn't set those values to be whatever we wanted. And we couldn't set them to be the same value, otherwise a lot of bugs occurred. So if melee was 0 to 5 yards and ranged was 5 plus, all kinds of bugs happened if you were, you know, right or near 5. So it was sort of a function of the code, and it was a tech problem that created the dead zone. So we had to create 5 and 6, or 5 and 8. I can't remember what it was. But
I believe it was 5 and 8.
5 and 8, yeah. So there was some overlap in there that created bugs and caused all kinds of problems. So, and a lot of that is because of server updates. You know, players aren't actually where they appear to be in relation to each other on different people's screens. So
before you mentioned like the class fantasy of possibly the mobile archer, but of course we also had pets. So, at release, you know, we had the 3 specs, Beastmaster, Survival, and Marksman. Were these all designed to have different class fantasies? And obviously one of the more popular specs in that case was Marksman, where most hunters before the revamp chose that one.
Right.
Were there reasons why Survival and Beastmaster didn't turn out as popular, in your opinion?
Well, popularity is, again, for a lot of people ended up being, you know, how good it was on the performance side, the numbers side. But the idea behind them was people that really want to explore the pet side of things would go Beastmaster. People that really wanted to explore the ranged weapon side of things, the sniper side of things sort of thing, would do marksmanship. And then Survival was sort of what was the leftover, unfortunately. Its thematic wasn't as strong on its own, but when we were making hunters, the sort of ideal was Aragorn. You know, the guy that he was great with weapons of all kinds. He was friendly with animals, you know, like there was an affinity there with his horse and stuff like that. And so that became kind of the thematic for Survival. It was like, yeah, he could dual wield when he got close, or he could swing a 2-handed weapon, but he didn't go as heavily into pets or, you know, archery.
Yep. With on Survival, Originally, Survival did have probably one of the most infamous talents around, which was Lacerate.
Yeah.
Why did Hunters get Lacerate?
Well, again, it was the defining thing of that tree, which was trying to be more melee and trap based, but that one just turned out to be, it was too off kit, too off thematic, because no matter what, you were still going to be a ranged weapon, pet using class. And so that was a mistake. And then it also had the problem of just being tremendously underpowered numbers wise. So, but the reason it took us so long to fix, to get my eyes on it was, again, sort of the same reason that Holy Paladins, the same reason that Redditans weren't looked at as much, is because the class was doing well in terms of how it was being invited to different types of gameplay. And so we were okay with one of the specs being pretty bad, as long as the class itself was being invited. So,
Kevin, I'll jump in with a listener question here, and this is from listener Iron X Last, who asked this. What was the thought behind giving hunters mana rather than some energy or rage system in vanilla? Auto/aim shot as well as Raptor/Mongo strike were all physical damage, and in my mind it seemed odd to use mana for these abilities. Was it a compromise because of pet management, or were you happy with the system in general?
No, the mana system was one that we tried to replace in beta at one point. It could have been in alpha, I can't remember exactly, but we tried to do an energy system way back then. And the problem we ran into was energy was going to work fine when it came to firing your weapon using your abilities, your combat abilities, and potentially ordering your pet around. But it was going to struggle to feed into the trap system. And so there were a fair number of traps and other things that didn't fit into those ranged weapon and pet abilities that didn't make sense to cost mana, for the same reason that melee weapons or the shots and the physical attacks didn't make sense to use mana. And so we ended up ditching the energy system that we built around being a ranged weapon class and feeding that mechanic. And so we ended up just bailing on it at the last minute because we couldn't quite get it to where we wanted it, where it was feeding all of his abilities. But he did need a resource system, and mana was the one that we had, and it had been tuned to that point, and it was relatively simple to understand and use. So we ended up sticking with it.
Okay. Well, look, let's start going through the specs, guys, as we do. We'll go through them all one by one, just relatively briefly. And again, I'll turn back to a listener question. And this is from Iron X Last once again to kick us off with Survivalist, who says this. Now, Kevin, do you think that the Hunter Survivalist spec fell short of being a proper spec? Or was it intended from the start to be like Mage's Arcane spec in that it rounded out the class with some useful abilities?
No, it was definitely supposed to stand on its own. It was supposed to be more melee-centric. It was supposed to be trap-based, potentially get into poisons more, things like that. But, we just didn't. Those mechanics within the Hunter weren't strong enough to carry the Hunter. And so talents built around those things also failed to carry. So we would have had to pretty significantly transform the class with the survival tree. And that wasn't really the goal of the specs, was to massively transform the class into something else. So, which is a departure from the Hunter in today's, modern WoW, in that survival does transform the Hunter. So pretty interesting change. But yeah, back in the day, it was supposed to enhance and help solidify a specific identity, but not transform.
Even in vanilla, after the Hunter revamp, survival itself did feel like it went through a small transformation where it was 100% melee focused and trap focused early on. In the later revamp, we saw abilities that increased overall agility, critical strike, and so forth. So was there a, design philosophy change there at some point?
Yeah, definitely. We experimented with more things. We wanted to try to bring the survival tree up to snuff, essentially, compared to the other two trees. And I was struggling to find a place where I could go with it. other than the idea that it was trap and melee based. So even though I was struggling with those things, I didn't really have a better idea. So that's how it ended up. But someone had recently pitched ideas for, we'd been talking about on my channel a fair bit, or how many more tanks or healers I would have added if I could have. And so this idea that the survival hunter had been a healer class or a potentially a tank class would have been interesting.
Survival hunter tank could have been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Kevin, I've got another one. Now, someone chimed in, and this was listener Norfair, who says, piggybacking off of the last question that I asked you, they said, and this obviously has come up in Twitch chat as well, and I'm sure it's something that gets put to you quite a bit. People are talking about obviously swinging Nightfall as a hunter in chat and stuff, and Norfair asks, can we put to rest whether Blizzard ever intended, aka you, ever intended to have a melee hunter spec in vanilla? There were many hunters who swore by it, much to the annoyance of almost everyone else in the game, to the extent that there was a hunter on my server with Thunder Fury who admittedly played a half melee, half ranged and trap heavy method. So what do you have to say about that, melee hunters?
Yeah, I think half is the best you could expect, at least from a design intent. Like, even if I were to stress melee in the survival tree, I don't think I would have I don't remember ever, and I don't think that wouldn't make sense to me nowadays to make him, just transform him into another melee class.
Was there an intention to have like hunters run in, attack with Raptor Strike, do a bit of damage, and run?
Yeah, that's more of what I would have ultimately seen, is some kind of half and half situation where you're running in, doing a few mechanics, then jumping back to range and going back to your ranged DPS for a bit. And Lacerate fit that mold in terms of it was a dot and you applied it and then you could back out, and then go back in to reapply it once you needed to. But yeah, at no point did I want to make survival hunters a pure melee class.
Okay, Locked, anything to tie off with Survivalist, or are you ready to move on?
I'm ready to move on. With plenty of questions to the other two.
Okay, let's do it. Let's talk about BM. Let's go, and I want to start this one off with some general pet discussions, because this one has come up a lot as well, Kevin. You might have answered this already or alluded to it, but I want to kind of get down to the nitty gritty, because people bring up pets and the fun things that some pets in the game can do, and people always bring up Lupos. Lupos this, Lupos that. So we talk about the shadow damage. I mean, obviously it was fixed eventually and changed, but when the game launched, you had this pet that could do shadow damage, and it was best in slot for a little while there, and people still look for that on private servers before it gets changed. But the question, I guess, generally would be this, and this is from Gantor2 in Twitch chat right now, who says, was the pet system meant to have some pets with ridiculous abilities and make them quite sought after? Was that the intention? Because obviously later on, things might have been changed and removed. What did you guys have in mind for pets with that sort of system?
Yeah, that was definitely intended. However, I will say that it was never intended that there be one beat all, or that there was a pecking order that was very, hard to find. This is the best pet. This is the second best pet. This is the third best pet for all situations, sort of thing. So the original intent was certainly, go out in the world. You have your pet. But go out in the world and find new animals to interact with, interact with the world, explore the world, find where all these things are. And you're going to eventually stumble across, things that are unique, things that are different. They're named. They look different. They have different abilities. We thought that was a really cool sort of collect 'em all system, right? And the fact that they had different abilities and more interesting abilities is just part of the philosophy that we took with items as well back then, which is just take risks, do crazy things, do weird things, and take risks. And, the reality of that, of taking risks, is that some things are going to be broken powerful. I think it's cool that there are pets that are unique and rare and hard to find, and you sort of have to camp and really search for, and then you get some benefits out of it. I don't like that they become the only pet you use for the rest of the hunter's, lifespan, essentially. So I like there to be a lot of different pets, a really interesting toolbox for all the pets that you might have in your stable. This is really good for this scenario. This is really good for another scenario. and then varied power levels, that people argue with, just as I would say with all the things where you're given choices on what item to equip, what spec to go down, which talents are better in what situations, healthy competition and healthy, theory crafting amongst all those things was always the ideal. So, but, we didn't always hit the mark. So things ended up being super overpowered.
With adding on to that, did you ever consider, such as with a pet like Lupus, which did do that extra shadow damage? One of the main mechanics for hunters was to go out into the world, find a pet that knew an ability, so you could learn that ability. So, did you ever think about the idea of having unique abilities on pets that could then be learned by the hunter and then could be taught to any pet?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We talked about of all the systems that we got in, the hunter got in a lot of extra systems in terms of pet training, and pet feeding, pet happiness. There were a lot of additional aspects surrounding the pet to try to build on that idea that this is the pet lovers class, the animal lovers class. What didn't make it were things like pet breeding. We talked about breeding, like you would actually, capture enough pets where you could create your own breeds, customize, the offspring essentially in different ways. So, and that idea that you mentioned would have fit within that. So how to train and how to breed, a specific pet out of all the things you'd acquired, all the knowledge you had gained. I've really liked systems in the past in RPGs where you go out in the world and discover power and abilities and things like that are in the world rather than like on the trainer or natural to you. So that was another system that fit really well into the hunter pet mechanic.
Moving on from that, obviously feeding the hunter pet gave you benefits of increased damage from the pet while it was happy and so forth. Was the intention of that really to draw, people who played hunters into, actually really liking these individualized?
We wanted, when I say like a pet lover class, it's not for the mechanical reasons. The player psychology we were trying to appeal to are people that love animals in real life. They have pets in real life. And part of that is you have to take care of it. So, since it's a game system, obviously the goal is to create gameplay incentives, like more power from doing the thing right. But yeah, we wanted it to feel like you were taking care of an animal. And some of it was work. You had to name it, which was different than the warlock pets. So you had to invest some of your personality into the experience. You had to take care of it.
I always remember my first fair win.
Happy. Yeah. So, and then it became an extension of you, like the type of pet you took and ran around with, how you named it,
Well, I've got a question.
All that stuff was feeding that fantasy.
I've got a question to follow up on that, Kevin. How do you feel then seeing the tweaks that have been made over time where, as you say, that whole design was sort of catered to these people that might enjoy raising this animal or looking after this animal and retaining its love and affection. And then obviously you've got in retail now, I believe you don't have to feed your pet or perhaps, pay as much attention to it to keep this thing by your side. How do you feel about that?
It's definitely a philosophy change. And I think that's actually one of the issues with modern WoW is that, convenience has become more important than investment and, the investment in reward and attachment and, all the things that we get out of, deeper systems. And I think it's a loss, honestly. I imagine there were quite a few people that were min-maxers back in the day who despised systems like pet feeding and happiness and just didn't want to have to deal with it and worry about it. But for all of those, I think there were quite a few people that actually enjoyed that process and felt really immersed in the experience. So it's a philosophy difference and one that I still stand by, but is very different than modern WoW.
Fair enough. Now, I'm not sure if Locke sort of somewhat raised this in his questions, but if I can try and nail you down to a specific, number, or as we did in, the last time I made you sort of lay some figures out there, all hell broke loose when we talked about druids and you laid out that kind of 95% plan. People lost their minds. But what I'm getting at with hunters is when we talk about, someone that invests a lot of points in BM, obviously there's quite a bit of power that you can afford to your pet. And they become this, really, really strong extension of your character in a way.
Right.
what kind of percentages or attitude did you have in mind in terms of how strong that pet was to become? And was it in intention, if you go down deep in that tree, to actually have a relatively weak hunter behind the wheels, but just this pet just doing, 65% of the damage or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, over a long enough period, no, the hunter would sort of never be the weaker element, but we did want burst moments, obviously with Big Red Pet. That was what we called it internally. That, for that moment, the pet should be extremely scary and performing at a very high percentage of the hunter. And then we would shift that percentage based on the talents you chose, marksmanship specifically versus beast mastery. But we definitely didn't want the hunter to be able to sort of go to sleep or take a snooze and have the pet do all the work. And that actually became one of the problems with beast mastery, is especially like in dungeons, because the pathing on pets was bad enough that the stigma was, send your pet away for this dungeon run so we don't get killed.
Make sure you dismiss the pet before you jump down to run.
Right. So there were a lot of moments like that where it was a liability. And so it was another thing where stigma created the scenario where hunters were sort of forced into marksmanship because, in scenarios where the pet was being asked to be dismissed, you were going to lose a very high percentage of your DPS. So we couldn't lean too heavily early on pet mechanics until we got the pathing problem sorted out.
What were the thoughts on pet scalability? Because as we go through the tiers, like Beastmaster really does start to weaken up when it comes to damage and so forth, as it doesn't scale nearly as well as it.
Yeah, and that's pretty true along the lines for a lot of different specs and a lot of different abilities we found over time. So what we had in vanilla was a variety of abilities. Some of them, and a lot of them, were really easy to read. They had great tooltips that were short and sweet, and they did a thing. But what we found was that in order to get everything scaling well into late game and beyond, they had to be more complex. They had to start taking percentages of weapon damage or AP or things like that, in addition to the things they were doing before, in order to have those scaling elements. And it really complicated things, but it helped avoid the problem of, well, you start a gear cycle using this rotation, and then things fall off as they fail to scale, and other things take their place. And, pets were in that category as well.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on, guys, and let's talk about, finally, obviously, marksmanship. Now, Locke, you're going to have to drive on this one, mate. I wouldn't even know where to start on this one.
This is the most fun one.
It's the most fun one. Go for it.
So, first of all, pretty much almost every main hunter spec in vanilla always aimed to get aim shot. For basically good aim shots, stand there, cast an ability, shoot a powerful arrow. With the hunter's damage rotation, what you had to do was weave aim shot and other abilities between auto shots. This made it actually one of the more complex rotations in vanilla.
Yes.
What was the reason behind that?
That was largely unintentional. That was an emergent thing that came out from players. Because when I look at again, the type of person that would be interested in playing a class, I think some are more naturally drawn to complex rotations and things like that, and others that aren't. And I wouldn't say that the hunter is an ideal class for a super complex shot rotation, because he has to manage his pet as well as ranges and mobilities for any kind of target that's mobile and things like that. So that ended up being more complicated than I had originally intended and hoped for. But I also thought it was super cool that there was a very high skill cap. And so it made the hunter pretty interesting from the start of the, vanilla to later on, when some hunters that were just kind of doing the normal thing, the baseline thing, weren't able to compete. And then somebody sort of cracked the code and figured out, well, if you do all this, then you can end up being a very high EPS class, when everyone else is sort of falling off. So I liked that there was a skill cap there, but it was far too complex for what I had originally intended. And so we tried to smooth some of that out of the experience over time as we expanded.
Continuing on for that, what was the main reasoning for the reload mechanic hunters had. Basically, after an auto shot, if you decided to move, or even just if you stood still, you'd have to wait for your weapon DPS cooldown to finish, weapon speed cooldown, and then you'd actually have to do a small reload animation as well before the shot would go off, meaning you could definitely not do any auto attacks while moving.
Yeah, it was flavorful to create the animation, the full animation, in terms of what it looked like and how it felt to fire these weapons. That was always really important to us. We put a lot of time into the very simple acts of swinging your weapon, firing your weapon, shooting your gun, whatever it was. And so that's kind of where it started. And then what it ended up being was this additional limitation on the reason why hunters, or it was adding to that hunter weakness in that it took him time stationary to do his thing.
And finally, when it came to weapons, hunters very much got large benefits from having those exceptionally slow weapons, such as the crossbow in Blackwing Lair. While we saw slower weapons on warriors and so forth normalized, these weapons on hunters were still by far the best in slot, just due to the fact that you did have those longer gaps between those auto shots, allowing for, easier timings with aim shot and multi-shot and so on. Was there any ever talk of trying to, normalize or simplify that?
Yeah, we did a lot of talk. Ideally, it would have been a situation where fast weapons had their place and created certain rotations and play dynamics that were competitive, and long reload times or long weapon or high weapon speed weapons had the same a different but competitive way of using it. But that was a lot of work that we didn't have time to do early on, and it also would have changed quite a bit how many abilities the hunter had, in terms of, well, if you give him 6 abilities or 8 abilities in order to create this reality, and he's only using 4 in the actual rotation, depending on what weapon he's using, that means he has a surplus of like 4 abilities. So it became difficult as well from a design perspective to put all of those things in. So we ended up just kind of going with slow weapons win. And that was true for melee at the beginning. You'll notice, like, if you remember, there was a time period where everything was 3.6, on a two-handed weapon speed.
All right, guys, we might move off of this one and wind it up with some sort of closing arguments. Locke, did you have any last points on marksmanship, or are you done?
For marksmanship, that's pretty much it. Yep.
Okay, no worries, mate. Now, Locke, think of any final questions you might have for Kevin, and I'll pop off my general ones that I usually ask him. Kevin, real quick, anything you can think of that hit the cutting room floor for hunters?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the pet breeding never quite made it in. Training didn't get as interesting or get enough time to really flesh that system out as much as we wanted. What else? The more mobility shots, like shots you could do while he was on the move. We added some later down the road in expansions, but a lot of stuff that didn't quite make it into retail.
Okay. And
yeah, that's about it.
Okay. And if you could go back just before release and change anything up with hunters, what would it be for vanilla hunters? Yeah,
probably the pet, the pet issue of different abilities on different things. I think I would have found better ways, or tried to find better ways to keep the huge canvas and the very textured way of like people going out and finding different things and getting different abilities on them and having lots of different tools, but trying to minimize the problem of this one was just the ultimate pet. So spending more time. The hunter was a very, very time consuming class, because every time we added an area, a new zone that hid new monsters, if any of them were beasts, it was like a ton of additional work, because we knew the hunter was going to have, access to all these new mechanics and these new creature types, and what was that going to do to balance and things like that. So it was a very time intensive class, but it was also an extremely fun class.
Okay. I've got one last question, and then Locke will turn to you, mate, and then we'll wrap it up. Just quickly, Kevin, listener Gantor2 in chat again raises a great question, and I've got an addendum to it, but he says, going back to what we were talking about earlier, Blizzard obviously has started to change the hunter over time, and they've removed also things like quivers and ammo. With the removal of ammo, it removed an entire profession, as engineers no longer had to make ammo as a gold revenue source. My twist on that sort of statement is, I've been wondering this for a little while. And please feel free, if you'd say you don't want to answer the question, I completely understand, but feel free to sort of speak your mind. But does it piss you off a little bit if you see people changing stuff that you worked on before? If you had a part of a class that you really, really loved, and then you see Blizzard change that in expansions, do you kind of get the shits, or how does it work?
Yes and no. I think it's a mixed bag, right? Because when I left the company, certainly it's not just my game. It's all of our games, and the people that were still there after I left, obviously they deserve their chance to tweak and play with and stamp their own identity onto all of these things. But I do appreciate some respect for, what the original intention was. And I think a lot of that was lost after the original 3 game designers were gone, and we didn't do a great job of passing that info down, passing that philosophy down. So sometimes they made decisions that I don't think they fully understood the ramifications of. Chat mentions, the engineers and ammo and, all that stuff. Like, a lot of people might play the hunter and feel like, oh, ammo is just such a chore. I'm one less bag. There's all these, elements that I just see as a pain in the butt, but they do feed into a larger system. And it's testament to the fact that MMO systems touch every other part of the game so easily and so readily. And there's such a chain reaction when you change things. So, and none of that stuff was put in, just to make people upset, just to like, oh, this is one of the weaknesses of the hunter is he has one less bag slot. They're put in to create a system where it feeds into the economy, and it feeds into trade skills, and it feeds in, there's a lot of other things going on that are part of just a bigger environment. And so it's difficult to just yank those things without affecting all of those other things. So yeah, sometimes it's frustrating that it seems like they don't fully understand the design intent behind it and how it connects with everything else before they make changes. And sometimes, yeah, it's frustrating.
I thanks so much for giving such a great answer to that question. I tell you what, I would love to, people I'm sure who are listening as well would think, God, I'd just love to hear Kevin Unchained, just unfiltered, uncensored, really talking about this a little bit more. But look, maybe that's another day. Maybe it's off show one day. Who knows? I don't know. But I tell you what, if you can write me a fun pitch, everyone listening, for how we get Kevin to do Kevin Uncensored, I'll take your suggestions and maybe I'll read some of the funnier ones back to him on the next call. But thanks for answering that, Kevin. Locke, I'll give you one last chance, mate. Jump in with a quick one. Final point on hunters.
Okay, I've got 2 quick questions. So first of all, I'll go with, we were talking about resource management earlier. With feign death, basically the most common way for hunters to get mana back outside of potions was to feign death and drink. Was that an intentional?
Well, yeah, it's a hard one to answer because we had different mechanics for, before we had the combat pulse like we talked about.
It's just one of those interesting moments where everyone's dying to a giant boss and there's the hunter sitting in the back taking.
Right. So yes, it was intentional that he have feign death and that he be able to escape combat using that ability. Was it intentional that it become a core part of his sort of mana regeneration mechanic? No, that's a bit of a stretch. But, yeah, I mean, in terms of what it was allowing him to do, how much damage it was causing and how much, gameplay and fun it was allowing, those are the kind of decisions we look at or things we look at before we make a decision on, do we change this and how do we change it? So we were fine with the way it was working in the context with when it was working the way it was. So.
And my final question is, and I think, people in the chat would definitely want to know the answer to this one. Do you know of Nightfall and how hunters have been using the weapon Nightfall inside of private servers?
No, I don't.
Basically, Nightfall is an axe that has a proc chance to give a 15% spell damage increase, spell damage taken by any mob that the proc goes off on. So what people are doing on private servers is they're equipping hunters with this two-handed axe and having them stay in melee 100% of the time and spam rank 1 wing clip, allowing them to rack up the amount of attacks they can do very, very quickly, just to keep this one proc on a boss. If that was occurring back in the day, would that have been something that was looked at?
Probably a bit much. I mean, the intention was obviously to make this weapon desirable for people that were already, in melee swinging two-handed weapons. So the worst part of that is you're taking a range class, forcing him to do something that's not part of his normal behavior in order to benefit the raid in such a way that it's actually more important than what he would normally be doing as part of his behavior. So yeah, that's a bit much, but I think it's cool. I like that it's emergent. I like that people found a really cool use for this thing. Obviously 15% damage is a lot. It should be handled carefully. They tried to handle it with the duration, but I think the gameplay that caused, again, is just spamming, wing clips. So not a great gameplay, but I like that it's an item that people got excited about.
All right, we'll wind it up there, guys. Locke, thank you so much. You did a lot of heavy lifting in this one. I know almost nothing about hunters. I had a few fun questions, but you did fantastically well. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for having me. Mate, my pleasure. Kevin, as always, you are absolutely killing it. Congratulations. We're 2/3 of the way through it. We can see the finish line. Thanks so much again for coming on, mate.
I hope there's a party at the end of this.
Yeah, there should be a big party. Well, I've got to talk to you, Kevin. I'm going to have to organize I've got a little bit of an Australian gift in mind for you at the end of this series as a thank you for obviously taking the time out. But, yeah, obviously, Kevin, thanks so much once again for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been a blast. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Josh here. I just want to take a quick moment to remind you that while Countdown to Classic will always be a podcast you can get for free, if you do happen to really enjoy the show and find yourself always coming back for more, then please do check out the show's Patreon page to see how you can help keep the lights on at Countdown to Classic and even vote on show content as the show continues to bring you more and more classic WoW goodness. Alternatively, if monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can always visit the show's tip jar over at Ko-Fi, with that link being in the show notes and on the website too. Now, let's get back to the show. Hey everyone, just before you hear this call about the huge PvP schedule news we got the other day, please do understand that the news broke when I was away from home. So I only had a terrible backup headset with me and the connection played with the audio quality slightly, so it sounds a fraction different to usual calls on the show. But if you're patient with all of that, the call's content turned out great. So I just wanted to give you a slight heads up and a request for a little bit of leeway on this one that I hope the show may have earned by now. But with that preamble out of the way, let's get into it.
All right, it's time for a Countdown to Classic emergency call, and the bat signal has gone up yet again to 4 fantastic Countdown to Classic listeners. Now, you'll hear, guys, that I sound very, very different to usual because I'm actually not at home at the moment. I'm away from Sydney on a work trip. I'm sort of, in the middle of nowhere on a terrible internet connection with a terrible headset on. So apologies for the sound quality on my end at the moment, but all of you, I'm sure, will sound fantastic, but people will appreciate that we've, had to put things together at the last second, but it's the content that's going to suck them in on this call. Now, we got some huge PvP news. This was the news that we had been waiting for, and luckily we didn't have to wait too long. We got the full rollout plans for when we're getting what in terms of everything and anything PvP. Now, you 4, I've got 4 people on the line here. 2 for, 2 against. We've got 2 very happy little campers about this news. And then we've got 2 people who are very much so not happy about this news. Now, I'm going to introduce everyone and we'll get all through it. We've got a couple of regulars on the show. You've heard these guys before. They're always up for it. I'm so happy to have them here. Viv, say hello.
Hello. How's it going?
Great, mate. Thanks so much for coming. And on his team, if you will, we've got Phantom's Power back again after a while. How are you, mate?
Good. How are you?
Good, real good. Going up against those two, we have show regulars, Taladrill. Mate, what's cracking?
Hey, glad to be here again.
And joining him, we've got Fred Munro. How are you, mate?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Now look, guys, I've told you my audio quality is terrible. This is much more so going to be a rumble amongst the four of you, and I'll just jump in where I'm needed. But I'm going to kick it off now. I'll start with you, Taladrill. Now, go into bat for your team, and we'll try and go back and forth, and you guys will get the hang of it of swapping back and forth, tag teaming on points, a la like a wrestling match. But Taladrill, open up on why you think generally this news perhaps isn't as great in your interpretation.
There's a few things. So first off, phase 1, we're getting effectively like open world, anything goes kind of thing. No honor, no DKs, anything like that. This is going to be when most people are leveling, so the fact that you can have griefing with DKs be something could be a negative. It's probably the least important, but it's there. Then you've got phase 2, where you now have the honor system, but there's no balance. That is going to open up for a lot of problems, I would think, with the farming of honor in open world. It's not going to be promoting world PvP, it's going to be promoting world ganking in a very strong way. And then the last part is that they said that items are just going to be available as they are. That means that we're going to be getting the full strength rank 14 weapons and rank 12 and 13 gear. And that's just going to be too strong for the fact that it's coming in at phase 2 rather than, say, phase 3 or phase 4. Those are my quick points.
Viv, what do you think of that when you hear that?
When I read this news, I thought to myself, so basically it's going to be like actual vanilla. So actual vanilla didn't have anything when you were leveling up. There was no honor system, no dishonorable kills, nothing like that. And I mean, sure, you got ganked sometimes. It's just natural on a PvP server to get ganked sometimes, but it wasn't that bad. And then once the honor system came into play, but there was no battlegrounds, and then there wasn't dishonorable kills at first in actual vanilla, but there will be in classic according to that post. So when that happened, basically the world went into chaos, and people were getting ganked all over the place. There's like guerrilla teams ambushing people from behind trees and hills and everything all over the world, and it was crazy. And that period was relatively short amount of time, like a few weeks or something. And then they brought out Battlegrounds. So to me, it's something people have wanted to have back for a long time, because they remember experiencing it. And all the people who hear about that brief period of time that didn't get to experience it want to. Well, not all the people, but a lot of the people in the PvP scene. So I think it's just something that it's trying to make it more like vanilla than anything we've had recently. And I think that's a good thing.
I'll just jump in quickly. Don't you think that the world PvP was much more about South Shore versus Torren Mill, that kind of stuff, not this like gang squad kind of stuff? Like if it only lasted a couple weeks, Blizzard probably saw back then that it was not a very positive kind of situation. That's why they rolled out Battlegrounds so quickly. Like I would think world PvP with the open world, no DKs, no honor system, do what you want for why you want. That's the kind of world PvP that you'd want.
I agree with Viv, though, because you need that kind of phase where there was honor, but before the BGs were released. It's only about a month. It's only a month in between. So you have a month where, yeah, there's going to be ganking, yeah, it's going to be interesting, but you have the honor. It's not going to mean that much going forward. It's just a month of time. Right? So it's a short time, and it's an interesting time to be around. It's a fun time to be a part of. So it'd be nice to be a part of that.
Why would it be a month? This is an entire phase. Should be probably 3 or 4 months potentially.
Yeah, technically, but there really should only be a month, because that's how much it was in vanilla. They shouldn't drag it on, right? Hopefully they are true to vanilla, and that's how long it was in the original. I don't see them doing it longer than that.
When you say it was about a month in vanilla, which period are you talking about, Phantoms?
When it was released, when Honor System was released, that was before patch 1.5. 1.5 was Battleground. So a month before the Honor System was released, then that's when it was. And then patch 1.5 was the Battlegrounds, it was a month after that. There's not much time, right, between when the honor system was introduced and then the patch came out, the Battleground patch.
Okay, so you're expecting them to do a similar thing and have about a month worth of Wild Wild West time.
Yeah, I can't see them doing it much longer. Right? Let's say you can't do longer than a month, right? So it beats you crazy.
Here's my thought. Phase 2 on the PvE side only has Dire Maul, Azure Ghost, Kazak. So, that stuff being out for more than a month isn't really required. So I could see them lining up both the PvE and the PvP of Phase 2 to only last a short amount of time. I don't know that they're going to make every phase the same amount of time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Dire Maul and the Battleground patch was 1.5. 1.5 was very similar. Battlegrounds was out in 1.5, and then Dire Maul, I think, was 1.4. So, but then Black Moon Lair was released not too long after that either. Right? So it goes pretty quickly. If you actually look through it, it's pretty quickly. It moves pretty quick.
Quickly going back to Taladrill's other question about, isn't it better for it to be like Terran Mill South Shore as what is World PvP and everything? To me, first of all, Blizzard didn't actually design it to be that way. It just kind of happened that way. That's where people ended up World PvPing a lot. But World PvP still happened everywhere else in vanilla. I was thinking specifically of when I was leveling in Western Plaguelands on my second character to 60 when that whole thing was released. It was an absolute war zone. There was people camping the camp or whatever the Alliance land in for the flight paths. There's people hiding behind all the hills and trees and in the water and everywhere, ready to kill you. And it was insane, but it was also very memorable, and you basically were forced almost to either get better, to not die, or to run away, or to kill them, or to bring friends. And it was a crazy time, but it didn't last that long, but is something that a lot of people want back. I don't know that I was one of the people that was actively begging for it back, because I've always been a giant fan of Battlegrounds anyways, so I didn't really mind if it was too short, I guess. I actually wanted it still to be that way for the people who absolutely love that period of time. I guess I could take it or leave it, but at the same time, I'm glad to see it there. I'd prefer it to be this way, just because, anything that makes it closer to real vanilla is fine with me.
See, for me, I would have been really excited, I think, for Phase 2, for having that honor system, if they didn't include dishonorable kills. Because dishonorable kills means you're not going to get any capital city attacks. That instantly kills anything, anytime anybody wants to rank at all, you're not ever going to join up to a capital city raid, because DKs will just kill you for that. So it would have been really cool, because those capital city, those leaders are worth some decent amount of honor. So you could probably have built some pre-mades that would have actually been pretty lucrative to do that with the honor system. That would have been not so cancerous to have it be constant world PvP of gang squad kind of stuff, but to actually have it be focused in a really interesting way. But DKs just makes that not a possible thing.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in, guys, just because I feel like we might break down the phases just one by one, because obviously we're a bit all over the place. But Fred, I might turn to you and just get your take on. Let's go through all the phases one by one, and we've mentioned a little bit of them already. But Phase 1, we talk about this, concept of the Wild Wild West, and PvP's in the game. There's no honor, but there's no ramifications for doing anything. Are you okay with that, or is that where your issues start to arise, or is it more later on?
It's really more later on, especially come Phase 2, when there's this huge incentive to do the ganking. I mean, I can only speak. I played vanilla, but I wasn't very serious, and I did a little bit of raiding, but I honestly don't really remember. It was 2006, 2005 long. But I do have very strong memories of playing Nostalrius too. And, Nano has said multiple times that he really wishes they hadn't done that rollback that lasted for 2 weeks, that basically made pre-made people impossible to get into pre-made battlegrounds, because they just started camping the flight paths, they started camping the worlds, and they basically become unplayable. And it was so bad, there was such an uproar on the forums that the Nostalrius team had to roll back this change. I guess they allowed pre-made PvP groups to just totally dunk on pugs just to get them out of the world. because it was making leveling like unplayable. Like you're level 48, and the second you turn level 48, you basically can't play the game anymore. You land at your flight path, you killed like 4 times getting out of that, and then when you're trying to quest, there's also these roaming death squads that come around. It was nothing at all like what you actually had in vanilla, and there's just such a huge incentive, at least on Nostalrius, to do that in order to get the great weapons. The people were doing it. And I just worry very much that if you provide this honor incentive without battlegrounds to sort of get people out of there, it's just going to become unplayable in the world. And it seems like, oddly enough, both Phantom and Viv agree with me that is a bad thing. Their stance is just, well, if it only lasts like 2 weeks, it's no problem, because that's more like vanilla. So I think our disconnect might be, well, I certainly don't think it's going to last 2 weeks. I think it's probably going to last months and months.
If you're looking at P servers, the population size is vastly different, right? So if you go back to more vanilla, I don't know, I just don't remember it being that much of a problem.
I didn't remember it being... Here's how I remember it. I remember it to where you would land at a flight path or something, you'd die, probably, and then you'd have to try to get away if you couldn't kill them or whatever. After you got away from that specific area, pretty much you could find a safe place and continue questing or whatever, because there just weren't enough people on the server to constantly be killing you like everywhere you went, like there was on Nostalrius. I remember on Nostalrius, even while I was just leveling normally, like in, 1,000 needles in the Shimmering Flats, I got ganked non-stop there just by people questing, like, because there's just too many people. Like, without intent to go around killing people, you just died 24/7 on Nostalrius because there was just too many people. So it's very, very different in actual vanilla, in my thought. And I actually don't think it's a very bad thing to have it in the game for a small amount of time, solely because, first of all, the World PvP is a very different kind of content than like Battlegrounds and stuff like that. And a lot of people really prefer that kind of PvP, so I think it'd be a shame to rob those people from at least their small window of fun.
You can always world PvP, I'm not saying you should remove honor from world PvP, that's not my stand. I think, you can also world PvP while you're waiting for your battlegrounds. If there's not 1.12 cross-run battlegrounds, I'm anticipating a lot of servers is going to be, 10, 20, 30-minute queues, and it's very common for people to, set their hearths to, Kargath or something, and then do some world PvP while they wait for their battleground queues, right? Like, I definitely think you should still be able to do that. You're making it out like you won't be able to do world PvP without this. But I think that's totally wrong.
In vanilla, when Battlegrounds came out, the amount of world PvP that happened was drastically reduced to the point where the only side actually actively participating in world PvP was the side with more players on it. Because when there's population imbalance, the side with less players gets instant queue pops 24/7, and they don't do anything but Battlegrounds. And the side with more players has to wait for their queues most of the time, so they'll queue up, and then they'll go around ganking people. So it's a very different scenario, very different setup. Like, when it's only world PvP, everyone's out in the world, and it's the Wild West, as Ale put it in Discord. Yeah.
Can I just jump in at this point? Phantoms, appreciating you've only just taken in the news as well, but sort of also respecting your opinion on the length of time. Are you saying, when you say a month, you're talking about phase 1, this phase 1 where there's sort of, phase 2 you're saying will be a month? Okay, sorry, I'm with you now. All good. That makes sense. Let's talk about that phase 2 for a second now, because obviously that's when they're planning on releasing the honor system, including dishonorable kills and also the rank rewards. Now, Taladrill, you may have mentioned it before, but you were really, really going into it on the Discord when these PvP rank rewards come in. I'd love to hear sort of your take, and then maybe Fred, if you can piggyback off of Taladrill's point, if you've got anything to add before we hand over to the other guys. Taladrill, you got issues with those rank 14 weapons being introduced at that stage because we've been told we're getting the 1.12 version of the rewards. So go for it, mate.
Yeah, you guys were talking about like how, it was a lot more about the PvPers for doing stuff. I think what we're going to see more, especially because of what we're talking about with these PvP rewards, since they are going to be the final versions, they are so strong and so lucrative for people that everybody who's even remotely interested in being competitive is going to be going full tilt to try and do all of this stuff. Now, maybe we'll find out that the open world PvP is going to be insane because of that, because everybody's going to be just going out there trying to murder each other. maybe it'd be amazing. But regardless, yeah, the issue is that they have said specifically that we're going to be getting these end game style weapons, and the increase to the weapon strength is significant. So, especially when you're looking at the weapons and armor, but if you're looking at the weapons specifically, they go up a lot. So they were added. I'm looking at this itemization thing, and it says they were added in patch 1.4, and I guess they got upgraded. At least some of these weapons got upgraded in patch 1.6. So Blackwing Lair, I think is 1.6, maybe it's ZG. And I did a quick calculation on them, and so they increased, at least their DPS increased by 20%. 20% for all weapons, plus stat increases as well. So probably you would be thinking of like between 25 and 30% actual increase in power, which is just crazy for how much stronger they are. And really, the weapons that you get as rank 14 are effectively AQ level weapons, and potentially, if Phase 2 lasts longer, now maybe Phantom's right that Phase 2 is only going to last a month, because ranking takes about 2-3 months minimum to get up to level 14. But regardless, technically you would be able to get these weapons pre-Blackwing Lair, and if they're AQ level weapons and you can get them in pre-Blackwing Lair, that's just crazy imbalance, in my opinion.
Fred, if I can turn to you, do you have anything to add to that before we get to the other guys?
I mean, the other thing I'd add is just the further point, which was that Viv was making the point that, I want WoW to be like there's nothing like how it was by having this weapon that was AQ style and changed in AQ available before Blackwing Lair's even. That horribly changes the balance and makes it very much not like what the WoW was.
Okay. Viv, if I can turn to you and Phantom's Power, and Phantom's Power, I might actually open with you on this one if you've got something to say about these rank 14 weapons being introduced at this stage, because one of the points of pushback I've noted has been, well, look, okay, yeah, maybe you've got a decent point about the 1.12 weapon being available at the wrong time, but just remember, you're talking about people who are achieving rank 14. They are going to be so few and far between that it's not going to be an issue. Are you only talking about, a handful of people or less per server or what have you? Sorry, Viv, I'll tee you up for this one. Just on that point, obviously, let's get a bit of a voice on perhaps whether or not you agree with that point that I raised, that like, guys, just don't freak out too much. It's okay. There's not going to be too many people with these weapons. So you're kind of, maybe making mountains out of molehills. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Yeah, I kind of do. And I soft disagree, I guess I would say, with the other guys, because there is a chance, depending on the way the content plan is rolled out and how long each phase is, that it could be mildly problematic. And I say mildly problematic because I don't think it's going to be a huge deal, and there's a lot of reasons why. First of all, I don't think everyone remotely interested in being competitive is going to do it, because there's a minority of people, a vast minority of people actually willing to put in that much time. There will be like 2 or 3 guilds per faction, like there was in vanilla, that are tryharding it. But in my opinion, the 2 or 3 guilds that are actually tryharding that much deserve to be stronger than everyone else, because there's nothing in vanilla that is harder time commitment wise and requires more effort than reaching rank 14. There's just nothing. I'm talking like everything in the game. Maybe short of all the consumables you constantly have to farm for Nax, but
I don't agree with the fact that, I totally am with you that if you're going to be tryhard, you deserve better. But I don't think that they should have access to sort of like a cheat code, effectively, where they get AQ gear before people even get Blackwing Lair out. That just seems like literally like cheating.
Here's my other thought. I don't think, the more I look at it, from what we said before and what we're saying now, I think Phase 2 is actually very likely to be short. And I think Blizzard's actually designing their phases and the PvP releases to go with them with that in mind. And I actually think it's going to be like maybe either like when guilds are like 2/3 of the way through doing Blackwing Lair, or by the time ZG comes out, one of the two, in Phase 4, that people are going to start, like the first wave of people are going to start having these pieces of gear. So to be honest, like, I don't know, is it really that big of a deal if people have AQ quality weapons, literally only one content release before AQ, like when it's just ZG. I mean, because it's not going to invalidate Blackwing Lair if Phase 2 is only like a month, and people are still trying to rank up through the whole Blackwing Lair thing almost.
No, I actually agree with you, and I think that you guys are right in thinking that Phase 2 might be a shorter phase. That would be smart, I think. It would worry me a bit because I hope that they don't see certain phases as being shortenable and other ones just keep them the same. Like it would, if we're going to shorten Phase 2, I hope we're lengthening something else, because there's a lot of content in vanilla. We don't want to rush through it.
Well, I completely agree with that.
You think there's going to be a long phase 1? Because I was thinking that, like, Phase 1, where, like, you don't even have access to Diamol or the world bosses, was going to be actually relatively short. There's really going to be, like, the super tryhards who get the ability to try to, complete MC without even having access to, the water or the other items to Diamol, and that was going to be added pretty quickly. So I was thinking Phase 2 was going to be long, and Phase 1 was going to be short, but you guys are saying the opposite.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I know I rarely comment on this kind of stuff, but I disagree with you there, Fred, just because my only point would be, wouldn't that be counterintuitive to the whole thing that we were bitching about? Because people going, Diamol invalidates Molten Core, and the tryharders, I think with or without Diamol are going to rip through it anyway. But, you talk about the more casual players, you would want to keep that challenge of Molten Core up and running for a little while. And if you open up the Diamol items to the, more average player, wouldn't that be more problematic in exactly what we were talking about? Like keep Diamol items away from Molten Core for as long as possible. And that makes it more sort of, vanilla-esque, if you will. So I was always of the belief that Phase 1 would be longer. So that's why I agree with what Phantoms has raised and what Taladril's agreeing with is that, yeah, it does actually kind of look like Phase 2 would be shorter and Phase 1 would be longer. But it's interesting that you think the opposite. Like I dig where you're coming from as well.
Right. So the way that the private servers did it was a little bit different. How it worked is you had Phase 1 Molten Core, which had like basically none of these updated items in it, and then you had Dire Maul come out like somewhat soon after that, and then you actually had a third phase before Blackwing Lair, which was the Alterac Valley phase, which also came with the new items in Molten Core and also rebalanced all the tier gear and made them way better. So for example, like Hunter tier gear and Rogue tier gear actually became wearable after this AV patch, and then you had even more time, like another 2 months after that, until BWL came out. So I was thinking that they were probably going to keep Dire Maul in the same place, and especially because it seems like the AV tier itemizations are going to be out, like the tier 1 gear from Molten Core is already going to be super strong, and you're already going to be able to access OEB and items like that. I was thinking it was going to be a little bit different. Phase 1 would be shorter, Phase 2 would be longer.
Fair enough.
So I actually did this just today, looking at this. What if you were to take Blizzard's actual release schedule and break it down into the current phases as they were planned? And so what it was showing was, if we were to go with how they say, is that phase 1 to 2 would have been 5 months, 2 to 3 would have been 3, 3 to 4 would have been 3, 4 to 5 would have been 5 months, and then last 5 to 6 would have been 3 months. So generally it was about 3 months. There were some 5-monthers in there, especially the first batch, obviously, too.
Interesting.
I'd like to jump in. If we take a look at vanilla, like actual vanilla versus private servers, we know for sure that private servers are full of the most die-hard fans of vanilla, the try-hardest of try-hards. And actual vanilla had way more casual people, and it will again. So my thought is Molten Core in original vanilla, the tryest hard people in original vanilla took 154 days or like 5 months.
Sorry, Viv, I'm going to jump in. It's the try hardiest.
That will not be the case this time around. The tryhards are definitely going to kill Ragnaros in like 1 or 2 weeks. But that is not representative of most players. Most players are going to take way longer to level. They're going to take way longer to organize their guilds and get going and everything like that. So, in my opinion, if any phase should take the longest, it should be phase 1.
Okay. Phantom's Power, you sounded like you had something.
Yeah, so I know between Blackwing Lair and Zelgrub, there's only like 2 months in between. So phase 3 and phase 4, there's not that much time, right? If you're only looking at like when they're released, not everything, but you're just looking at the major, like, instances. Major instances.
Okay.
So really, Iron Mall should be pretty short. And yeah, I do agree phase 1 should be a little bit longer. That's why when I was thinking they should have an in-between phase, not have the honor system be its own phase, and have WSG and AAV released in phase 2. That's where I
counting all the pre-raid best in slot dungeon farming that has to take place in phase.
Yeah. Now that you've mentioned those battlegrounds, I know you've got to go soon, Fred. So I just want to get your, perhaps, one of your last comments on what is really the final point as we talk about these, phase 3, 4, and 6. But phase 6 isn't particularly interesting with the world PvP objectives. That's all fine. We probably guessed that was coming. But phase 3 and 4. Now, people are talking about the split between, now I know this is, there was a split back in the day, but people are saying, Alterac Valley, Warsong Gulch in phase 3, Arathi Basin in phase 4. Well, how long are we waiting for Arathi Basin? That seems like a weird split, even though people know that they were split up back in the day. What are your thoughts on that, Fred?
I don't mind it. I mean, I generally like the battlegrounds, so I would have liked them to be available sooner, but it's not really something that I'm gonna, lose. And I do have to go, but thank you so much for having me on.
That's all right. Thanks, Fred. Appreciate it, man. You run. We'll talk about the rest of it from here. Taladrill, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I don't really get it, honestly. I mean, maybe to add more content to different phases to look forward to, but it's not like there was some kind of overarching reason for why Arathi Basin wasn't in there. It was because it took too long to develop more battlegrounds. Like, if, they've got the content, why not just release it? Like, it makes sense to me just to have all 3 open. Like, I saw there was one question, like, well, what about honor weekends? Like, what are you going to do? Just have a weekend that's off? Like, you don't get a weekend when Arathi Basin hits that week? It just makes no sense. So it's just like, to me, just have them all at phase 3. Like, what the heck? I don't understand that.
Well, I guess the pushback there would be like, hey man, authenticity. We're giving you the authentic vanilla experience.
Well, here's the authenticity. Warsong Gulch pants weren't even available until 1.11, and those are really strong. So, I mean, it makes no sense to have them be Blackwing Lair level when they're really max level pants. So, I mean, there is no right answer there. So,
very good. Very good, very good.
One thing I think about that, I remember back in actual vanilla, doing like rep grinds for the battlegrounds, and when this stuff was coming out, there weren't battle masters. So basically,
that's true.
It allowed you to sit outside of the battleground entrance and stay in that one place to farm your rep for that battleground until you were done farming the rep. So if they don't have battle masters, which I doubt, that makes a lot more sense. If they do have battle masters, I could go either way on it. It doesn't really bother me either way. I can see what you're saying, but I also see the side of just like, hey, it's the way it was. I don't know. Either way, people could focus on the reps of the first 2 in phase 3. I don't know. Maybe it's a rep thing. Maybe it's just because they want it to be close to, and they see no reason to change it. Or
I think it's amazing. That's what I'm most happy about, is the split. I think it's it's so important to keep that split because it doesn't last that long. I know we have these phases, but it really isn't that much time in between. So it only happens for a short time, and then they're going to be together forever. So I actually love this split, and it gives more people a chance to focus on WSG because everyone's going to do the rep grind, but AB is known to be more efficient in terms of honor farm. So once it's released, there's no real reason to do the other ones unless it's a weekend. And I also think they should delay the weekends. Yeah, they should delay the weekends until phase 4 when they were initially introduced with AB. They should also delay the battle master fight as well.
I mean, that would be the right way to do it, is delay the battle masters, because that really changes things and it keeps people in the cities and has less world PvP potential.
As someone whose favorite battleground is Warsong Gulch, I actually agree with the point of WSG being there without Arathi Basin being a good thing, just because I want to be able to experience as much of that battleground as possible for a while.
Arathi's only better when you're 5-capping, so I mean, Warsong is still very good when you've got tough opponents against you or turtle-type people.
guys, we'll wrap it up here. And I just want to get from all three of you your best guess, because the last point really for that, basically the introduction of Battlegrounds and the split is roughly how long do you think we're going to be waiting to get them? So we don't get a Battleground until Phase 3. Phase 3 also contains Blackwing Lair. So it's, fair to say we're going to be waiting a little while before we get it. But real quick, if I had to pin you down, how many months would you say we're waiting until we get Phase 3 with Blackwing Lair and Battlegrounds? Taladrill, I'll start with you.
Between Phase 2 to Phase 3?
No, I'm saying from launch, from launch to Phase 3.
Oh, okay, so I would say I'm going to go with 5 months for Phase 1. I like the 1 month for Phase 2, so then Phase 3 is 6 months in.
Yeah, I actually pretty much completely agree with that.
I think they should bump up to Phase 2, the Battlegrounds, and then put the honor system a little earlier. Just have like a in-between phase where they just introduce honor system.
Like a partial patch would have been perfect. It would have been perfect to do something like that, I think, yeah.
You do a 1.5 just for that honor system, and don't have DKs, and then when Phase 2 comes out, put the DKs in, and there you go. Perfect.
And BGs, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and the BGs with that, with the Phase 2 with the Fireball.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you slightly more time to farm honor, though, potentially, unless they just shorten the other part of Phase 2 even more. So.
Yeah.
It just depends on how you do it, yeah.
All right, guys, I'll wrap it up there. We've gone for about 40 minutes now, and I know we could talk all day about this, and don't get me wrong, there might be another call to come in the future, but we've hit sort of the greatest hits of points in terms of this call. So I just want to thank you all again so much for being here, and look forward to seeing you around the Discord.
Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, Josh. Okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great to jump on.
All right, it's time for another Countdown to Classic call, and we've got a return caller. I'm so happy to welcome back 1927. How you going, man?
Good to be back.
It's great to have you back. Obviously, we had a very extensive chat on the show before about your time in Death and Taxes. And while you were talking to me about that, you started mentioning a lot of points about Hunter PvP. And you really piqued my interest because you mentioned that even though you'd stopped playing the game a very long time ago, your memory was still really clear and you were really confident talking about that. So luckily, you've agreed to come on today and talk about Hunter PvP. Now, we'll throw in the caveat, and I'll let you go through it a bit, that obviously, as we say, you haven't played in the game in a long time. You haven't played on private servers where perhaps people have developed, I don't know, new tactics or new trinkets or consumables or what have you to go along with all this stuff. But, I'll let you explain to people. Obviously, you may not have kept abreast of that, but you're still pretty confident in talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched some of the private server guys' streams, and I've looked at the list of the items that have changed the game. People really, when I played, people really didn't have, Title Charm. Even iron grenades weren't used that much. The charge helmet, the net, things like that weren't really used. Frost reflector even. But yeah, I do have a good memory, and I specifically remember some of, the best fights I had and some of the worst beatings I took.
All right. Well, this is going to be a call specifically focused on Hunter PvP and how we're going to do it. I plan on doing this for all the classes. We're just going to talk for a few minutes how a hunter would approach and try to take down each different class, maybe the pros and cons of what you might be about to face, and some interesting sort of little things you can do to try and win that encounter. So one thing you mentioned when we talked on our previous call was warriors, and you really sort of raised my eyebrow because I'm the fool that sort of for some reason thinks that warriors are pretty mediocre in PvP, but you seem to indicate the opposite. So from a hunter's perspective, and please get as detailed as you like, when you see that warrior, what are you thinking?
When I see the warrior, it depends on the situation. If it's just me out there and it's just the warrior, I'm thinking, free, this guy's screwed. If it's in a duel, the same thing, I'm thinking he's screwed. But in group PvP, world PvP, even, just two people, a warrior and a healer, there was nothing quite like it. There was, every class sort of stood out in various ways. Like I said, Hunter was very good at, ganking in a world PvP. Rogue's the same thing. But warrior, if they had a healer, specifically a paladin, there was just no stopping them.
Oh, I can imagine. How about this? All right, we'll set this up for all of the encounters. Let's say
for some reason, it's Taran Mill and South Shore, and for some bizarre reason, there's no one else around. And you spot this warrior in the distance, and you know that he's coming your way, and you know that you're going his way, and you know that a fight's going to break out. Tell me how you're going to take down that warrior.
I mean, yeah, it depends a lot on the surroundings. If you've got enough room, you can range, his intercept. You can use aspect of the pack, and you can just stay in that sweet spot between where he can intercept you and where you can shoot. And you just got to keep him in combat with your pet, and you can run him around. If he comes at you, you back off, you kite. If he tries to want to run away, you run. But not every fight is like that. There isn't often terrain where you can just range him and, he stands no chance. A lot of times, he might be right on top of you. You might be in Black Rock Mountain. You get intercepted. Obviously you want to hit, the feign trap. You need to get some distance away from him. Even if he uses his PvP trinket, you have your scatter shot, you have your wing grip, you have deterrence. A lot of people are afraid to use deterrence against a warrior. But I felt like, dodging or parrying, a 2,000 damage mortal strike crit, I'll rather take that than, and then take I'll rather dodge the 2,000 damage mortal strike crit and then deal with the overpower, because, you can also, I think it was you could dodge hamstring. Maybe it was just you could resist. But being able to use deterrence allows you to get away, and get some distance. And, most of the time the warrior is just not going to be able to get close to you, and you can just kite him back and use multiple traps. And, warrior is just free food for a hunter. And that was, really something I enjoyed, as a hunter, because everyone complained about warriors. They're too strong in PvP. They have healing reduction. They have, crazy AoE damage with sweeping strikes. But as a hunter, it was just, just looked like free food to you.
Are there any abilities that the warrior has at his disposal that as a hunter you're concerned about?
I mean, any abilities. Even if they used Intim Xiao, which had, I think, a 10-minute cooldown, maybe longer, they could use even PvP trinket. Most of the time there were just no situations where you're really too afraid of a warrior unless he had a healer on him. If you had a healer, even if you had a healer, they could extend the fight. He had anti-healing. He could run you down. If you had a paladin, he's got Blessing of Freedom. He's just on you. There's nothing you can do. The paladin's got, so much armor himself. He's got a shield as well, so you can't attack the paladin. If you hit the warrior, you're giving him fury, so the warrior's just running you down. In those circumstances, yeah, there's nothing quite like it. But, in a duel situation or a one-on-one, warrior was just somebody for you to kite.
Is there anything specific you can think of that a warrior should be afraid of in a hunter that isn't necessarily universal amongst, oh shit, there's a hunter? Is there anything that warriors go, oh God, I hate hunters?
Yeah, I had a lot of friends who played warrior, and they just complained over and over. If you're a warrior, I would just not recommend engaging a hunter one-on-one unless you're in close quarters, because most of the time it's not a fight you're set up to win. It's kind of that rock paper scissors thing, and I don't think there's much you can. Now, and that's even having talked to some of the private server guys and watched them play. I just can't imagine how many different consumables would ever really change that.
Okay, obviously being a hunter, you've got a pet. For PvP, is there one pet and one pet only that you like to stick with for all the classes, or are you chopping and changing depending on who you're fighting if you had the choice?
I kept the same pet most of the time, but that pet changed because Blizzard was always adding new pets that had crazy abilities, and then they were always too strong, so they were always nerfed. But the first really strong pet I had, and which still remains strong throughout the game, was Broken Tooth. He was a cat. And what was special about him was his attack speed. And I think he's in the Badlands, maybe level 40ish or so. He's a rare spawn, takes a lot of camp. But early on, before the changes to Beastmaster, before it became a viable spec, it actually was probably the strongest dueling spec because it was bugged. You could stack all 3 ranks of Spirit Bond. You could have 3, 2, and 1 all active at once. And what the old Spirit Bond did was every attack your pet healed you a flat amount, so it scaled with pet attack speed. So cats had a naturally fast attack speed, and then Broken Tooth, being a rare spawn, had an extra fast attack speed. So you could, have that pet put all 3 ranks of Spirit Bond on, and that allowed me to even be able to duel. There was a prop paladin who had Thunder Fury on our server, and he was basically impossible to duel. He just had so much health, so much healing, did so much damage through Thunder Fury. But yeah, as basically someone bugging out the BM spec with Broken Tooth, you were able to beat him. And Shamans even too were very strong duelists, often considered the most overpowered. And even before the changes to diminishing returns, which allowed which put a diminishing returns on their frost shock, because previously, as a hunter, you got hit with frost shock, there was no diminishing returns, so they could just, the duration was longer than the cooldown, so they could just permanently keep you slowed 40% or whatever the amount is. So you were basically screwed if you got inside a shaman's range. But as a BM hunter with Broken Tooth, you could actually kill shamans 1v1, so that was very enjoyable. There was the Scorpion, which did shadow damage, which ignored armor, so that was a very strong pet. And then there was the Bat I used for a very long time, which had a Screech, which provided the debuff. Now, I can't for the life of me remember what it was. But one of the stronger pets, too, was the AV Wolf, and that's the pet I was using in my video because it had an ability, Furious Howl, which gave you plus X amount of flat AP, I think, or plus bonus damage on your next attack. And that's what I used. I kept him on my side. I didn't even make him attack because I didn't want other people to kill him, because people would get pissed at you or whatever and just try to kill your pet to piss you off. So I kept him on my side to keep the AV buff on me to make sure I was getting maximum damage from crits. So yeah, AV Wolf, one of the strongest pets. And I think he even had an extra fast charge, an extra fast run speed. So he was very annoying that you could keep players in combat with.
You mentioned there was a Scorpion that does shadow damage. I mean, I know about, obviously, pre 1.12 Lupos, the wolf that does shadow damage that a lot of people salivated over, but I didn't know there was a Scorpion that did it as well.
Maybe it was the wolf. Maybe I'm confusing with the Scorpion. I could be. Yeah, like I said, this has been 13.
Yeah, no, sorry.
I'm look up the specifics. Yeah, but yeah, if you just look up, Broken Tooth, the wolf, the Scorpion, the Bat, and the AV Wolf are the top ones that stick out.
No worries. No. I generally, believe me, I'm the last person that knows anything about this stuff, but, I'm not trying to sort of shoot you down. I was generally like, is there maybe a Scorpion that does it as well? I haven't heard of this one, but no, there might well be.
If I get anything wrong or misremember, please point it out.
No, absolutely. And the same thing goes again. Obviously, listeners, just remember it's been a long time since 1927 played the game, but still very clear that he knows his stuff. Mate, one thing I might say is to set this up in general before we get to all the classes. What would you say to people who are thinking about playing a hunter for the first time? They want to get involved in PvP and they're just not sure if the hunter is a strong class or not in PvP. Just what can you tell about blanket coverage of whether or not you think hunters are strong in PvP?
I mean, in my opinion, they had one of the highest skill caps, and if you could play, it was arguably one of the best characters. The only, argument you could make against it was there were some duels you couldn't win, but every class sort of had its counter. And again, like I've said multiple times, the warrior healer combo was definitely stronger than anything else. There was no competition. But other than that, Hunter was very strong, but I would say it sort of was like either you had it or you didn't. I would say pick a hunter and early on do some dueling, do some PvPing, and if you don't like it, if you can't manage the dead zone, if you can't position properly, I would just pick another class because it doesn't get easier because, it's either you can, play that sort of kiting role, you can keep people out of your dead zone, or, you're just going to be food for other people.
Okay. Now, the next class I want to talk about is when we had our last call, again, when you were speaking about your time with Death and Taxes, at one point during that call, you seemed to suggest that as a hunter, you eat pieces of rogue for breakfast. So I want to talk about the rogue class. And again, I'll put you in that situation. If you've seen the rogue in the distance, you know that something's about to happen. He's coming your way. What are you thinking? You're obviously not shaking in your boots when you see that rogue running at you.
Most of the time, at least leveling up, and even in World PvP too, it's not like me seeing the rogue in the distance. It's me identifying the rogue on the track humanoid thing and actively going to him with glee to put this guy down. I mean, they were the most notorious gankers. And like I said, I joined the game about a week after my friends, so they're telling me about Stranglethorn Vale and this, and rogues are going to do this and that. And to me, you can see a rogue in the distance. You put Hunter's Mark on him; he's visible forever. Then, the cooldown or the duration was so long, it was absurd. And you have Flare too. If you don't have a Hunter's Mark on him, you can de-stealth him. So you just have a perfect, and even traps too. He wants to sneak up behind you. Go ahead and step on the trap. So rogues were just they were just the most ideal target, and it was fun too because they were the ruthless gankers, and it was great to be able to give them a taste of their own medicine.
All right, listeners know I'm allowed one stupid question per interview, and I'm going to use that early now. If you pop Hunter's Mark on a rogue and they then go into stealth, can you still see the Hunter's Mark?
Yeah, that's a great thing. It seems so ridiculous, but it lasts 2 minutes and it has a 2,000 yard range. I mean, it's hilarious.
That is hilarious. That's great. Well, look, how about I put you in this situation? Let's say you're running along doing your own thing and you didn't have track humanoids on and a rogue pops out of stealth and opens up on you. Are you screwed then, or you're still pretty confident about what you can do in that situation?
Yeah, and not to be too nitpicky, but you basically always had track humanoids on. But sometimes if you're fighting someone else, you were farming, you would get opened. But when it came to rogues, it was sort of, unless it was the most upper of upper tier geared and, players skilled, rogue, there was nothing to worry about, even if they had to jump on you. Basically, thinking back, there was only really one time. I lost the rogues from time and time again, from time to time, but there was one rogue, Drakon, the guy I had talked about too, had told stories about him, being, vitriolic on the forums. He was a funny guy too. He was actually the guy who, did the funny, comical freestyle rap at the end of my PvP video. But this rogue Drakon, very skilled player, in-depth in taxes, geared to the teeth. We dueled one time outside of Ironforge, and it was the first time I ever had a player do this to me, where, the duel starts and it's, I'm expecting to get him in a trap, but he just manages to dance around outside of my trap the entire duel, hitting me almost across the trap inside of the dead zone, meleeing, still proccing crippling poison on, and just keeping me in the dead zone over and over. And I was sort of, sometimes I can go, if a rogue doesn't have good gear, the type of gear I had, I could just melee them down, it wasn't too much of a challenge. And, rogues obviously complained about that once on the server at least. But against good rogues, you try to get that distance, you try to get them in that trap, but the way Drakon was able to dance around my trap so perfectly and apply crippling poison and keep me slowed, he just tooled me. There's no other way about it. And I remember to this day, 13 years ago, being embarrassed by him. And so if the rogue was, top, you were screwed a lot of the times. But other than that, it was, they couldn't really touch you.
Any specific abilities that rogues have at their disposal that you're, as a hunter, a little bit afraid of?
Not any specific abilities, but it's just the whole kit, their ability, to blind, to vanish, then to reset their cooldowns, do it again, to gouge you, to just control the fight over and over again. As a, geared hunter with, a high amount of agility, so I had a high dodge chance to match theirs, and then aspect of the monkey, and then the Grand Marshal's Claymore really allowed me to melee down any rogue that wasn't well geared. If you didn't have, a significant amount of raid gear, there was almost nothing you could do because the Grand Marshal's Claymore just hit so hard, it was very slow, and the Raptor Strike had that extra 20% chance to crit. So you had about a 40% chance to crit on this melee attack, and it had a very short cooldown. And then you could even wait for the cooldown by scattershotting them and just standing next to them and waiting to hit them again. So yeah, rogues mostly weren't a problem unless it was a very geared rogue played by a very skilled player who knew how to manage the dead zone, stay out of your traps. He kept applying, poison over and over and used his cooldowns effectively.
You mentioned aspects, and obviously one thing that I want to just go on a quick side note about is if you're facing any class, again, a similar question to the pets, are you going to want the same aspect up at all times, whether it be aspect of the monkey or aspect of the hawk, or is it ideally you'd be chopping and changing aspects for different classes and different encounters?
Yeah, you needed to be chopping and changing. Aspect of the Pact was not that useful if you're standing outside of Ironforge and dueling. But in World PvP, or if you're dueling on the lake below, and you got a lot of room, allows you to kite, and stay out of intercept range of warriors, allows you to stay out of range of Shadow Priests and stuff like that. But again, versus, any of the melee classes, you needed to be quick on aspects of the monkey. Having that extra chance to dodge was very important. And even versus warriors too, you wanted them to be able to dodge their abilities. Sure, they could overpower you, but I feel like dodging, everything overall was more important. And especially when you pop the turns too, it was very frustrating. I'm sure they can overpower you over and over again, but when they're only hitting you with that one, ability, really, it's not too much to worry about.
Okay, next class I want to get through is Hunter on Hunter crimes. What happens when you see the mirror image across the field, that fellow hunter with perhaps, let's say you're fighting a mirror image of yourself. He's got the same pet, he's got the same aspect up. What are you thinking to somehow get the jump on this guy?
Versus another hunter, he's got a track of humanoids so he can see. So it's really difficult to get the jump on a hunter. Most of the time, I just outgeared everyone by so much. It wasn't really too much of a competition, sadly. You just open up. If you can get inside their range and hit them with a scatter shot, then get back outside and avoid their scatter shot. That's really the only counterplay. Most of it is just, spamming your abilities, almost your rotation. You're hitting your multi-shot, you're weaving your auto shots down, you're fanning to drop if you can, to make them drop target. But other than that, it just came down to gear, really.
Okay, fair enough. Have you had some weird hunter versus hunter encounters in the past that seem to last forever, or generally whoever's the more skilled player will just go down? There's no way you really draw it out.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't too much, not too much counterplay, and it just came down to gear, really. And if a player didn't know basic things, I mean, it could be a lot easier on yourself. But hunters always wanted to duel me, but I didn't, spend too much time dueling them. They just wanted to sort of see like where they were, on some way to measure themselves. But it wasn't like too much of an interesting duel. Not like kiting around any of the other classes or fighting like a 15-minute duel against a paladin. It's nothing like that.
Is there one moment that might happen with a hunter if they get a certain sort of opener on you, or if they pop a certain ability halfway through the fight that you might think, fuck, they did that first, now I'm probably going to lose?
No, I mean, if a hunter opened on me, I was keen to use, Greater Healing Potion, which was kind of BM, at least in World PvP. In dueling, you wouldn't do that, but I would heavily farm, tubers and night dragons. So if anybody had an advantage on me, I would, just use pots to remove that.
All right, fair enough. Let's go to the next class. Let's talk about Shaman. Now, you see that Shaman? What are you thinking? You see him popping down the totems in advance, getting ready for you. What do you want to do?
I mean, if he's set up, I'm not going in, especially early on. Shamans were very strong. And now maybe this is just being an alliance player. We didn't really get to, know their full extent of their abilities. They weren't in any of our raids, so there was sort of a mystery. But yeah, they were hated, thought to be very OP. Now, of course, I know, Horde thought Paladins were OP. And as healers in group PvP, definitely. But solo, I didn't think they were that impressive. But yeah, especially before there were diminishing returns, you just knew if you got inside of his range and he hit you with a frost shock, you were most of the time dead.
Okay, let's say they're not set up and you get the jump on them. What are you thinking now?
I mean, if I get the jump on them, usually it's just a judgment call. How prepped is this guy? Is he fighting mobs? What's his gear look like? Can I take him down? Because, like if there's a limited amount of time and once, you've engaged the fight, there's no way out of it. So you've got to know, can you win this fight? And that is, just a judgment call. And it depends on, depending on what you see, you have to make that call. Like, should I engage this guy or should I leave him alone? Because there was it's not like a rogue or a warrior that jumps on you or whatever. It was kind of like, this wall, the shaman was like a wall and he had his own. And like, it was, could you go and fuck with him or not?
Now, as a hunter, what particular abilities of the shamans are you a little bit wary of?
I mean, it was that frost shock, man, that just gave him the ability to sit in your dead zone, sit in between, where you could hit him, with your ranged weapon and where you could hit him with your melee.
Mm-hmm. You talked about a couple of times just in passing that you did seem to think that shaman in particularly dueling scenarios were potentially OP in a way. Do you still feel that way, as a hunter? Do you think that if there's a straight up dueling scenario that you're probably going to lose against a shaman, or you still back yourself?
No, it depends. As I sort of grew up and got better gear, and they removed the no diminishing return, they added diminishing returns to Frost Shock, I became one of the few classes that I could actually duel shamans. And I spent a lot of time, especially for an alliance player, dueling shamans because, like I said, I was sitting in queue for 45 minutes at a time waiting to get, rank 14, or get into battle rounds to get rank 14. So I spent a lot of time in front of Ogrimmar dueling shamans. And then I had another friend who I'd met on the server who played on Horde, this, orc shaman named Alucard. And we did a fair amount of, I guess what could be termed cross-teaming, and a lot of dueling too. And it gave me a lot of experience with shaman and using aspects of the wild, the nature resist aspect that hunters had really gave me an edge over them. And, of course, all the shamans bitched about, it's BM, you wouldn't normally have that on, whatever. I'm like, yeah, if I see you, an elemental shaman geared out, like, yeah, I'm throwing on my 60 nature resist. And I had the cloak off rag, which gave me a little nature resist too. So hunters were actually very strong against shamans. And, even enhancement shamans, like, there wasn't any crazy, unbreakable style, rag wielding, enhancement shamans on my server, but there was rank 14 ones. But those guys you could kite most of the time. So it wasn't too much of a problem. But yeah, the elemental ones, those guys casting a chain lightning, stuff like that, they were difficult. But, also being, rank 14, I had a, 2-piece, the stand bonus and other, raid gear, which gave me, close to 6,000 health between, I guess, 5,700 and 6,100. So I was able to survive their burst. And then, actually it let me either run them out of mana with Viper Stings or just burst them down if I had a, lucky string of crits.
All right. Let's move on to the paladins now. And I know this is one class that a lot of people sort of roll their eyes and go like, oh, fuck, a paladin. You know, is he just going to bubble Hearth away, or is he, you know, just going to be, you know, indestructible and take me down over time? I don't know. But what do you think as a hunter when you see that pally?
I mean, yeah, I was Alliance, so I never fought against them, but I have a pretty good idea of what it was like. I mean, I can tell you at least from an Alliance member that, you know, when I recorded my PvP video, my pocket healer was a paladin. You know, there was nothing quite like it in, you know, in World PvP or in Battlegrounds. They were just an immovable wall. You could not get rid of them. They wear plate. They have shields. They have bubbles. You know, if you're being, if the enemy team jumps on top of you, they can Blessing of Freedom you, allows you to kite very well as a hunter. So yeah, Paladins as a healer in group PvP, bar none, the strongest, can't be argued. Druids were strong too. Priests sort of got better towards the end, but there was just nothing quite like a Paladin for their ability to stay alive and still provide, support as well as healing.
It's fascinating to think about, actually, knowing that you've gone the rank 14 grind, and God knows how many hours you have spent playing PvP in World of Warcraft back in the day. You've never had an encounter with the Paladin strictly because you were an Alliance player. Yeah,
and no, I did do a good amount of dueling, so I knew what it was like.
Of course.
They were difficult to duel, but yeah, no World PvP, didn't have to deal with them at all. But yeah, like I said, Shamans, leveling up and before diminishing return, Shamans were very OP, so I some familiarity with dealing with things that were OP, but yeah. No, I mean, I'm glad I never had to deal with the Warrior Paladin combo, that's for sure.
No, it's very silly of me to forget. Of course, we've got duels. Do you remember generally how you fared? Were you winning more than you were losing against Paladins?
Yeah, duels versus a Paladin were very difficult. I mean, if you're dueling in front of Ironforge, there's not a lot of room. You just, there's not much room to kite. Now, if you're down in the lake, the frozen lake outside of Ironforge, you can get inside of aspect of the pack, and you can outrange them, and you can spend a lot of time running around in circles, basically spamming rank 1 spells, getting them to use cleanse, and trying to play the mana game. It was very difficult to burst down a geared Paladin, so you just had to sort of wither them down, and there were duels that would literally last 15 minutes. It was exhausting. I dueled a lot of Paladins, but a lot of the times I would just be like, I'm not interested in fighting this war of attrition with you just because of the nature of the way the fights went. And like I think I'd mentioned earlier, there was a Paladin on our server who had Thunder Fury, the first Paladin to get it, actually. He was in Drama. And, funny enough, we gave the first Thunder Fury in Drama to a Paladin because, the stats on the item had been data mined, but no one had used the item when we first looted the very first binding, because you needed 2 bindings, 2 pieces to the item to make the item. And they were very rare, and it took months for them to drop. So the first one dropped, we didn't know what it did. There was tons of Paladins, and this one Paladin had a lot of points, spent all his points on this. So then the second one was going to go to him no matter what, so it wouldn't be a waste, Yeah. But inside that time, people actually got the item and realized, oh shit, this procs very, frequently. It procs off of itself. It's insanely good for rogues, for Fury Warriors, But meanwhile, we're giving it to this Paladin who's halfway there, who can literally do nothing with it in a raid almost. He's just like a heal bot. Ret wasn't a thing back then. And I think Ret would want to use a 2-hander anyway, correct me if I'm wrong. But, yeah, as a dueler, with a shield, with a Thunder Fury, there was basically no one that could kill him. I'm not sure in any class, really. I guess I wasn't too familiar with his other matchups, but I just remember people complaining about him. And I remember me thinking, I didn't really want to fight him. Aside from what I touched upon before when Spirit Bond was broken, that was the only iteration when I could fight him. And a lot of times he could stalemate it anyway because it would just take me so long to grind him down. So yeah, Paladin in duels, a force to be reckoned with, a wall.
Oh, wow. My heart hurts a little bit hearing that use of Thunder Fury, but obviously, hey, wild alternative use of it. So, good for them if they became quite the jeweler.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to a class that is obviously considered quite strong in PvP. Every class has their moments, I'm sure, but, let's talk about mages who, a lot of people sort of go, oh, fuck, there comes a mage. What are you thinking as a hunter when you see that mage coming across the battlefield?
Yeah, this was another one where in World PvP, mages were targets, much like rogues. They wore cloth. They didn't have a lot of health. Some of them would even have, 3,000 health, 3,100 health, so it wasn't much. And, yeah, they did a lot of damage. And, if they had good gear and if they had their cooldowns up and their trinkets up, they could put the hurt on you. But a lot of the times, as a hunter, with the gear I had, I have close to 6,000 health or over 6,000 health, I could survive a trinketed POM Pyro. And if you're able to survive their burst, they didn't have any recourse. They didn't have any consistent damage. I wasn't too worried about mages. Dueling, different story. A lot of it came down to the location of the duel. Again, I hate to harp on that, but up above in Ironforge, when they're in your face, it's very difficult to kite. If you have a lot more room, or if you're world PvPing and you see a mage farming, nothing better to ride up when he's not looking, when he's busy, either drinking or fighting mobs to get off your mount real quick and shout him all to aim shot before he can react. And it was just, free HK.
Now, you've already mentioned that Pom Pyro moment. Is that pretty much the only big tool that you're shaking in your boots about, maybe depending on where you're at with health?
I mean, back when I played, there was a infamous, not a very well geared, but an infamous, Ice Mage. And yeah, Ice Mage was very good in PvP. It didn't have the same, burst that Pom Pyro Fire Mage has, but it didn't need the same gear. He had double ice block, cone of cold, frost nova, and a very good frost mage could be, a big problem for hunters because they could get inside your dead zone, they could control you and keep, themselves in that sweet spot where they can't be hit. So yeah, frost mage could be a problem. Fortunately, on my server, there just wasn't too many good ones. There was one famous PvPer, but he didn't have that great of gear. So, we dueled a lot, but most of the time my gear carried me in that. But, it's just dueling, so I didn't put too much stock into it. But in World PvP, it was difficult to catch a hunter off guard because of track humanoids. But it was very easy to catch mages off guard, so I very much like seeing a mage when I'm out in the world.
All right. Let's tear through the casters 3 in a row and move on to warlocks. What do you reckon about warlocks and their trusty little pets by their side running around?
Yeah, warlocks were one of those sad classes, which just basically sucked early on in the game. Most of the time I played, they didn't have death coil, so if melees jumped on them, they were screwed, and they didn't have the sort of, they scaled very well, but that gear that helped them scale didn't exist then. So as a hunter, seeing a warlock was, one of your favorite things. It was just free food. Things changed now, and definitely, private service has shown me that, even before Nax with good gear, yeah, and after they added death coil, a warlock, probably your worst duel. There's just no way to avoid their damage, and you don't have enough health to survive their burst because they have consistent damage, unlike a mage. So yeah, and they have a lot of health themselves, so there's no way to burst them down. So after warlocks became strong, after they got gear, after they got death coil, it was just murder for a hunter. Out in world PvP, try to range them, try to avoid them or get the jump on them when they're not looking. But yeah, warlocks probably the hardest fight. Maybe Shadow Priest the hardest fight.
Okay. And I'm being reminded, thank you to listener I Toast Your Oats in Twitch chat who's asking for your opinions. And you've already said it. It's going to be a very hard fight. Appreciate that. Specifically, what's your opinion on the spec that is very popular, that, that Soul Link lock with, perhaps 7,000 HP plus and 30% reduction?
Yeah, those kind of stats came after I played after the Nax gear, but yeah, Warlock, even before that, Warlock was, one of the worst, if not the worst matchup for Hunter. So yeah, there's really not a lot you can do. You can't burst them down. They have the consistent damage to kill you. So a lot of the time is that, it was like rock, paper, scissors, and there was just, you were paper and they were scissors, and there's not much.
Any particular abilities of there that gave you the shits when you would see pop up on you?
I mean, nothing particularly. Obviously, Death Coil is their one, go-to. If they run up on top of you, you're casting something, or if you're trying to get an aim shot off or something, hit with Death Coil, that sucks. And Fear too. Back in the day, CC lasted very long, and I can remember, priests and warriors even into shout, and warlocks obviously fear you around for so long. It was infuriating as a hunter, but really, it was just the combination of all their consistent damage that you just couldn't deal with as a hunter.
Okay, let's talk about Priest next and knock off the casters, and maybe we'll focus obviously on Shadow Priest because more often than not, that's the spec that you're going to run up against if you're engaging in PvP. Tell me what you think of a Shadow Priest charging at you.
I mean, yeah, that was, other than Warlocks, that was the worst. And there was one particularly geared Death and Taxes player who was a Shadow Priest, and yeah, we dueled a lot. And most of the time, I accepted duels versus him just to humor him because he wanted to see where he was at. He wanted to up his game against hunters that he found out in World PvP. But even as the best geared hunter, there was really nothing I could do against him. I would win the occasional duel when I chained together crits. But yeah, you couldn't burst them down, and they just had enough damage to burn through your health. They didn't have to try to burst you. They would just win the fight over time, and there was not a lot you could do about it. Fortunately, I played early on before Shadow Priests were even really a thing. So most of the time when I was playing, if you saw Shadow Priest, it was a gimp spec. It didn't work. It was just free food. And then even Holy Priests, yeah, sure, in group PvP, they're strong. Healers are, very strong in group PvP, but they were the worst probably. They're in cloth, and yeah, their AoE fear is very strong, sure, but they just don't have the utility of a paladin. They don't have the damage of a shaman. They don't have the survivability of a shaman, or the mobility of a druid. So priests not that strong in PvP, but they were, of course, the strongest healing PvE class.
If a priest obviously pops that temporary bubble up, absorbs a little bit of damage and then starts healing a little bit, are you particularly fussed as a hunter, or are you still laughing, going like, I can get through this?
I mean, yeah, if you're in world PvP and he's a holy priest, it doesn't matter. Like, I have consistent damage. I'm not like a mage who just hits you with a burst. I can just sit there auto-attacking over and over again. So, yeah, I'm not too worried about the consistent healing. But the consistent damage of a shadow priest, yeah, there was, not a lot you could do about it. Like I said, me and one of the guys from Death and Taxes dueled a lot over and over again, and it just, I mean, maybe I was missing something big. It's possible, but it just seemed like at the time there was almost, I had no recourse. There was really nothing I could do about it.
And well, let's touch on the final class, druids, the jack of all trades. People talk about, oh man, they're a great flag bearers in battlegrounds and whatnot in Warsong Gulch. But let's say just the world PvP aspect. You spot that druid. What are you thinking?
I mean, yeah, I had a unique experience with druids. I mean, yeah, if I spot a druid, druids, yeah, were annoying a lot of the times. If you see a mage out there, you're like, oh, free kill. You see a rogue, free kill. Druid, not necessarily. They had high health. They could heal. They had travel form. They could escape you. They had, water form. They could get, away through a lake or something. So yeah, druid, not free food. Now, I played before feral was really a viable spec. So if you saw some feral druid who thought he could fight you, that was comical and it was an easy kill. But resto druids, healers, in group PvP, very strong. Resto druid and a warrior, that'll strike fear in the heart of anyone except for maybe a paladin and a warrior. But and then, one of my best friends in real life, Tiger Lady, this dude who played a druid for drama, we did a lot of PvPing together. He actually healed me out of group, inside battlegrounds for a while when I was grinding Grand Marshal to make sure I would get full honor from kills. He's a good friend. He's the guy who filmed my, PvP video. I filmed my PvP video at his house. Me and him did a lot of dueling too. And, druid was just one of those classes, sort of like paladin, which, were just not favorable to dueling as a hunter because, they had bear form, they had healing, they could survive your bursts, and they had mobility. They could get inside your dead zone, and they could just wheel you down in caster form, hitting you, with starfire and a little bit of moonfire, not to waste too much mana. And yeah, there was not a lot you could do as a hunter versus druid, one of the worst classes to duel with. I fought druids many times, and yeah, there's, it wasn't a lot you could do.
Well, you just talked about that caster form, and I was just going to ask, were you still playing the game when Moonkin form was introduced in patch 1.8?
Yeah, I remember seeing them, but I don't think either there wasn't the gear for it or wasn't buffed enough. But yeah, when you first saw Moonkins, it was like a joke. It was like saying like a feral druid or something, or like a red paladin. You're like, oh, very cute. You don't have the gear. This is a stupid spec. And
Any one ability that you really don't like? You talked about obviously, maybe the casters hitting you with some stuff that you might not like, but is there nothing that you think like, oh fuck, he just cast that?
I mean, you really innervate. You'd fight this long fight with him, and you'd be trapping him, bandaging, using Viper Sting, trying to wear his mana down in this very long fight with the druid, and then like you see his mana going down, down, down. You're thinking, I got a chance, but up. Innervates back up, and he just has a full mana bar again, and you're like, well, he just reset the fight, and you're screwed.
Well, that's all the classes covered. I don't think we've left anything out. Please let me know, anyone, if I missed one. I think that's everything. But I guess we just end on this point, and I would ask you, if someone was trying to figure out how to take you down personally as a hunter, I know we talked about hunter versus hunter fights already, but let's say I'm playing you. What should I do to try and take you down? Something that perhaps you were a little bit weaker in the PvP game or anything like that. Things you didn't pay as much attention to that maybe other hunters don't pay as much attention to, which is nice little niche way to try and get the win.
I mean, I never had it used against me, but I know people used it. The Frost Reflector, yeah. I mean, if you have the right, unique, items, yeah, they're really crippling against the hunter. If you pop that reflector and step into his phrasing trap, he's screwed. But a lot of it, I don't think came down to like laziness or anything that was overlooking. It just came down to like you needed to have the right class, the right gear, and you needed to be a very good player, and you needed to know exactly how to avoid traps. If you were a good rogue or you needed to know how to, manage the dead zone properly if you were a shaman or a warlock or something like that. But, I'm trying to think, is anything like specific about hunters? I mean, you just got to get inside the dead zone. You got to use your CC properly. You got to dodge traps. And you got to just watch where the hunter is walking. He's going to try to lead you into his trap, so don't follow him straight on. And he might switch his tactics up and try to, lure you off at an angle then. Just don't play his game and don't get hit by his traps.
Which class do you think was the best at getting to your dead zone and staying there?
I mean, it depends on what point in the game. Early on, shamans, they hit you with one frost shock, you're in it. You're slowed permanently, there's nothing you. But then later on, I mean, it depends. Like a warrior could intercept and get to your dead zone, but, you could freezing trap them, you can counterattack them and immobilize them. So it wasn't too much of a problem. Same thing with rogues, but really, druid, they could just sit inside your dead zone very easily. They were very mobile.
Okay. One last question for you, 1927. You've been absolutely amazing on this call yet again. Where would you rank hunters in the PvP game? Let's say just one-on-one, straight up, world PvP, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Where would you put them?
I feel like that is the one area, as a solo world PvPer, that is where Hunter is bar none the best. There's no competition there. I feel like other classes are good at world PvP, but they require support. But Hunter as a soloer is very well rounded. It's they're very well defended against the other good world PvPers like rogues, the other good gankers. And when you're out in the world, you've got a lot of room to move around. You have track humanoids so people can't jump you. Yeah, Hunters, I feel like that's where they excel. And that's why I felt like, everyone complained. They thought Hunter was so bad, blah, blah, blah. But I just did not see it. I love the class. And if I played again, I would definitely play Hunter again. And, that world PvP, that solo PvP was great. They weren't the best duelers, sure. But, really, it's like dueling. It's not that big a deal. And in group PvP, they certainly weren't as good as a warrior, but they were often better than rogues because they were ranged. They could still do very high damage. In mages, they weren't confined to just bursting one person down. They had that consistent damage. And I feel like, they weren't the best in group PvP, but they excelled certainly. But solo world PvP, there's nothing like a Hunter. It's the best.
All right. Well, maybe I set myself up for that one. Maybe I should have expected, obviously, hey man, we're the best, we're number 1, but you've added some very good reasons to bolster your argument why, yes, perhaps Hunters are number 1 in world PvP.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I can't again say thank you enough for coming back and being on the show for a second time. We'll have to touch base again later down the track. And I just want to say, I'm sure people have taken these tips on board and will use them in Classic. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it's great to be on, man.
And that's the show for today, everyone. But be sure to tune in next week as we have even more calls for you. So tune in for more Kevin Jordan, more calls, and more Countdown. Before we go, let's get through some thank yous, and a big thank you, as always, to the following patrons: Aero PC, Anti, Binger, Brandon K, Cascade, Connor C, Damien A, Dave K, David F, DJ M, Eric L, Herbert, James S, Jamie S, Jeff J, John HC, Josh W, Minoru, Randall H, Rasmus S, Rarebit, Rick S, Ryan K, Schmigge, Sylvia K, Tim B, Tim S, Torbjorn C, Voikora, and Zudamos. And of course, the very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. An extra special shout out and thank you from the bottom of my heart to Alice R, Billy C, Eric S, Firespitten Kitten, Flosy B, Batlord, Carl W, Nick B, Palfurus, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without you. So that's it for today, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you all next time.